One day, in the store, the woman walked toward the back area and stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. She was shaken to her core. What intensified her terror was the realization that she had seen this woman alive in the store only hours earlier. Fighting the urge to scream, she slowly backed away from the body, only to bump into someone behind her. Ginger Rios was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to Denise and George Rios. She grew up alongside her sister, Daniela, in a close-knit family. From a young age, Ginger was vibrant, energetic, full of ambition. She loved music, dancing, and singing, often spoke of performing on stage one day. As a child, she once promised her mother that if she pursued the arts, she would someday become Miss Las Vegas. Ginger thrived in social settings, lighting up every room she entered. Her intelligence, warmth, and charisma made her unforgettable to those who knew her. As she grew older, Ginger pursued her passion professionally, working as a backup dancer in a show called The Salsa Machine. When she was 20 years old, she met Mark Hollinger, who was 34 at the time. Despite the age difference, Ginger was confident and mature beyond her years. Her parents initially had concerns, but ultimately approved of Mark after seeing how happy and secure Ginger was with him. Their bond formed quickly and deeply. Eventually, they got married and moved in together, determined to build a stable future, especially with thoughts of eventually starting a family. Ginger decided to look for a book that could help them improve their credit. This was 1997, long before financial advice was readily available online. On April 4, 1997, Ginger and Mark were driving along Maryland Parkway in Las Vegas when they noticed the familiar storefront of Spycraft. The store stood out immediately, its windows filled with cameras and unusual equipment. Spycraft was part of a chain with multiple locations across the western United States and was known for selling surveillance devices, tracking tools, and books on specialized topics. Mark stayed in the car while Ginger went inside. She planned only a quick stop to browse. She took nothing with her except her wallet, leaving the rest of her belongings in the vehicle. Spycraft attracted all kinds of customers. Some were simply curious or concerned parents, but others had more questionable motives, looking for devices that could be used without drawing attention. At the time, the store was operated by Craig Leslie Jacobson and his wife. Minutes passed, then more time. Ginger didn't return. Mark waited in the parking lot, watching the entrance carefully. If Ginger had stepped outside, he would have seen her, but she never emerged from the front door. Anxiety began to creep into him. Ginger's delay was completely out of character, especially since they still had errands to run. Finally, Mark got out of the car, entered the store. He went straight to the counter and asked about Ginger, wanting to know whether she was still inside. The response stunned him. Jacobson told Mark that Ginger had already made a purchase and left the store some time earlier. Mark knew immediately that this wasn't true. Alarmed, Mark began searching the store aisle by aisle, calling her name. Ginger was nowhere to be found. Clearly, something bad has happened. Mark returned to the store owners, pleading with them to help locate his wife. Jacobson repeated the same story, insisting that Ginger had made a purchase and already left the store. This response only deepened Mark's confusion and growing sense of dread. With no other options, he left the shop and called his in-laws, reaching George Rios, Ginger's father, to tell him that she was missing. George initially suggested that Ginger might have stepped into a nearby store and that Mark may simply have missed her leaving. At first, George was not overly alarmed. But as the hours passed and there was still no sign of Ginger, concern quickly turned into fear. This behavior was completely out of character for her. She would never disappear without saying anything. Adding to the worry, Ginger's bag was still in the car with Mark. and the only thing she had taken with her was her wallet, which contained very little cash. It became increasingly clear that she had not left voluntarily. Both George and Mark realized they needed to report Ginger missing. Sensing that something serious had happened that evening, George and Mark returned to the Spycraft store, hoping to review the surveillance footage to track Ginger's movements. When they arrived, the shop was closed. Craig Jacobson and his wife were outside near a van. Mark and George approached them, asked to see the security footage. Jacobson said he were busy at the moment and told them to come back over the weekend if they wanted to view it. There was nothing more they could do that night. Though Mark and George went their separate ways, Ginger's disappearance hung over them like a dark cloud. By the following Monday, she was officially reported missing to the police. Detectives immediately noted how unusual the situation was. At first, they considered whether Ginger might have run away, but a review of her bank accounts quickly ruled that out. Her money remained untouched, exactly as it had been on the day she vanished. Ginger also carried very little cash, making it unlikely she could have gone anywhere intentionally. With that possibility eliminated, investigators began assembling a list of potential suspects. As is standard procedure, Mark Hollinger was among the first people scrutinized. What puzzled the investigators was Mark's reaction when Ginger went missing. Instead of contacting the police immediately, he had called her father first. From a law enforcement perspective, this hesitation seemed suspicious. Then, just days after Ginger's disappearance, something even more unusual occurred. Mark's car caught fire and was completely destroyed. Police viewed the incident with deep suspicion, believing the fire was unlikely to have been accidental. Investigators began to suspect that the vehicle may have been deliberately set ablaze to destroy potential evidence. Eventually, police conducted a thorough investigation into Mark. Throughout questioning, he remained firm, insisting he had nothing to do with Ginger's disappearance and claiming he was just as desperate to find her as everyone else. As for the fire, Mark explained that the car had overheated while he was driving home and suddenly burst into flames. He said he barely managed to escape as the fire spread rapidly. By the time he tried to react, the flames were out of control. At the time, cell phones were not widely used, and finding a payphone was not always easy. The burned-out car was seized and carefully examined for any evidence that might shed light on Ginger's disappearance. With no evidence tying him to a crime, Mark was ultimately released. As days passed without any sign of Ginger, investigators faced a difficult truth. Something had definitely happened to her. Police shifted their focus to Spycraft, the store where Ginger Rios had last been seen alive. Investigators wanted to review the store's surveillance footage, but quickly ran into obstacles. Craig Leslie Jacobson, the store's owner, was reportedly in Phoenix, Arizona, overseeing another location. Without him present, officers were unable to access any video recordings. Even so, they decided to examine the premises themselves. When officers entered the bathroom at the back of the store, they were immediately struck by a strong odor of bleach. On the wall, they noticed a single, tiny red stain. Though small, it appeared suspicious. When questioned, Jacobson quickly offered an explanation. He claimed that his dog had made a mess in the bathroom and that he had used bleach to eliminate the odor. He further insisted that the stain on the wall was also caused by the dog. In 1997, DNA technology was limited, and such a small trace was difficult to analyze with certainty. When asked again about Ginger, Jacobson repeated the same story he had told Mark. But when officers asked him to produce either the video or the receipt, he was unable to do so. Whether this was due to deception or poor record-keeping, it raised serious red flags. Investigators sensed that something was wrong, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do anything. With no progress at the store, police turned their attention to Ginger's work as a performer. They explored the possibility that she might have been stalked or targeted by someone unstable. Despite following multiple leads, this line of inquiry led nowhere. By then, nearly a month had passed since Ginger vanished, and the investigation was at a standstill. There were no solid leads, no reliable witnesses, no answers. A few months later, a woman came forward to provide information. Her testimony would finally provide clarity about what had happened. The woman's name was Cheryl. She was Craig Leslie Jacobson's wife at the time. Cheryl revealed critical details that investigators had never heard before. When asked why she had remained silent for so long, she said she feared what he might do if she spoke up, especially because she was the one who had found Ginger. Cheryl believed that speaking out could put both her and her infant child in grave danger. According to Cheryl, from the moment Ginger entered the store, Craig's attention became disturbingly fixated on her. She described his stare as intense and unsettling, as though he couldn't take his eyes off Ginger. Shortly after Ginger arrived, Craig ordered Cheryl to retrieve something from the back of the store, something he frequently did, often barking commands without explanation. Cheryl went to the back as instructed. When she returned a few minutes later, Ginger was gone. At first, Cheryl assumed Ginger had simply made her purchase and left. Around that same time, Mark entered the store, visibly worried, asking where his wife was. Cheryl genuinely didn't know what to tell him. After Mark left, however, Jacobson warned her not to go into the storage area at the back of the store. Despite her fear, Cheryl decided to go back anyway. When she opened the door, she nearly screamed. Ginger was lying on the floor, motionless. As Cheryl staggered backward in shock, she ran directly into Jacobson. An encounter straight out of a nightmare. He stepped close to her and threatened her, warning that if she ever told anyone what she had seen, both she and her baby would suffer the consequences. Cheryl later told investigators that Jacobson confessed to her what he had done while she was away. According to her account, he had grabbed Ginger from behind and attacked her, killing her inside the store. He offered no explanation, no justification. The horror of Ginger's final moments was almost impossible to comprehend. A young woman, alone in a store, brutally attacked, killed by a man she had never met, while help was just feet away, and no one knew. Cheryl recalled that, to conceal the crime, Craig Jacobson, along with another employee, thoroughly cleaned the back room of the Spycraft store using large amounts of bleach. Afterward, Jacobson placed Ginger's body into a van, the very same van beside which he and Cheryl had been standing when Mark and George came searching for Ginger. That night, Ginger's husband and father had unknowingly stood just feet away from her lifeless body. Even more devastating was the fact that Cheryl knew exactly where Ginger was at that moment. But fear kept her silent in her husband's presence. Cheryl told police that about a month later, she, Jacobson, and their infant child traveled to Arizona desert, where Jacobson buried Ginger's body in a remote desert area inside a wooden box. Authorities eventually discovered a body in the desert, but at the time, it could not be positively identified as Ginger. When Jacobson learned that remains had been found, he immediately fled. It was ultimately Cheryl who led investigators to the precise location where Ginger's body had been concealed. The remains were found buried beneath sand and concrete. Later, forensic testing confirmed that the body belonged to 20-year-old Ginger Rios. Following this discovery, police obtained a search warrant for the Spycraft store. Inside, investigators found traces of Ginger's DNA in the back room. An even more disturbing revelation soon followed. Craig Leslie Jacobson was a fugitive with an extensive criminal history. Years earlier, Jacobson had fled under an alias to avoid prosecution for burglary and theft. After serving time, he changed his name again, married Cheryl, and continued operating Spycraft stores across several western states, including a location in a Las Vegas strip mall. It remains unclear whether Cheryl was aware of the full extent of his criminal past. Investigators also uncovered troubling patterns. Reports indicated that Jacobson often fixated on women with dark hair. One young man later claimed that Jacobson had paid him to photograph such women. In August 1997, Jacobson was arrested in Los Angeles following a confrontation with a police officer. Though details of that incident were limited, he was quickly extradited back to Nevada and formally charged with Ginger's murder. During legal proceedings, Jacobson ultimately confessed to killing Ginger, claiming that he suffered from schizophrenia and displaying erratic behavior. Prosecutors, however, argued that he was not mentally ill and was deliberately feigning symptoms in an attempt to secure a lighter sentence. Reports from within the prison system suggested that Jacobson had openly discussed plans to pretend insanity in order to manipulate the courts. Although prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty, they eventually offered Jacobson a plea agreement, which he accepted. Under the terms of the deal, Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years and ordered to pay approximately $3,200 in restitution to Ginger's family. There was, however, another chilling discovery. Another set of remains was found in the desert near Ginger's burial place. Years later, authorities identified her as Christina Marie Martinez, a teenager believed to have also been killed by Jacobson. Christina was 15 years old when she disappeared in May 1987, after visiting a nearby laundromat. She lived in a group home in Arizona, located across the street from a branch of the Spycraft store. Tragically, no immediate large-scale search was launched for Christina, likely due to her troubled background and prior encounters with law enforcement. She went missing for many years before her body was found in the desert. In 2015, after completing his sentence in Nevada, Jacobson was extradited to Arizona to face charges related to Christina's murder. In 2016, a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court initially ruled Craig Jacobson mentally incompetent to stand trial. That decision was later reversed, with the court concluding that he had been exaggerating or feigning mental illness. On September 21, 2017, judge approved a defense request for an additional competency evaluation. Since then, there have been no significant public updates in the case. Craig Leslie Jacobson remains incarcerated. Investigators have long suspected that Ginger Rios and Christina Marie Martinez may not have been his only victims. In May 1997, he was also suspected in the disappearance and possible murder of another young woman, Mary Stoddard, whose body has never been recovered. The death of Ginger left a deep and permanent scar on her family, who continued to carry the weight of their grief long after the case was closed. At one point, Craig Jacobson even wrote letters to Ginger's father, expressing remorse for the pain he had caused. In those letters, he claimed he attacked Ginger because she had supposedly snapped at him inside the store that day. But nothing in his explanation could justify murder. Tragically, Ginger's mother, Denise Rios, passed away from cancer on July 24, 2014, carrying with her the unbearable pain of losing her daughter years earlier. Her passing left Ginger's father, George Rios, and her sister, Daniela, to navigate their grief alone. The only comfort they found was believing that Ginger and Denise were together again in a place free from suffering. Ginger had been looking forward to her future. She dreamed of owning a home with her husband, raising children, and watching her family grow. She hoped to perform on stage, to dance, to sing, and to build the creative life she had always imagined. But she never had the chance to reach those dreams. Her life was stolen at just 20 years old, long before she could see any of it unfold. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ita Berley Lozano. Ita Berley Lozano was the son of Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira. After divorcing Ita Berley's father, Tatiana got married to Alex Pereira. Together, Tatiana and Alex had another child, People who knew the family described them as quiet and unproblematic. Tatiana worked as a manager at a local supermarket, and her eldest son, Ita Berley, lived with her. He was considered a polite and well-behaved boy who enjoyed spending his free time listening to music with his friends. The situation worsened when, at the age of 14, Ita Berley confided to his mother that he was different from other boys and was not attracted to girls. From that moment on, his mother often ridiculed him, and their arguments became increasingly frequent. By the end of 2016, their relationship had deteriorated significantly, and Tatiana began physically abusing her son. The day after Christmas, Ita Berley shared several posts on Facebook describing his difficult home life. He included a photo of himself with his mother, stepfather, and younger brother. In the post, he wrote mainly about his family. He also shared other photos showing bloody cuts and scrapes on his face, back, chest, and arms. In the comments, Ita Berley revealed that his mother had beaten him and kicked him out of the house because he was different from other children. In the post, Ita Berley mentioned that he was staying with a friend because his mother had ordered the children in their neighborhood to attack him. A few days later, he returned to his mother's house, but the arguments continued. One day, his mother beat him again, forcing him to run away. This time, he went to his grandmother's house, where he finally found safety. His paternal family welcomed and accepted him. His mother, Tatiana, called him several times, urging him to return home before December 29, claiming that she wanted to make up with him before New Year's Eve. However, his uncle, Dario Rosa, and other family members did not agree to let Ita Berley return to his mother. They doubted Tatiana's sincerity and suspected that she might endanger the boy. Despite their warnings, Ita Berley was happy that his mother seemed willing to mend their relationship. Hoping to improve things with her, he left his grandmother's house, unaware that a trap awaited him. Tatiana had devised a cruel plan to teach her son a lesson. She hired two young men, Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa, to attack him. When Ita Berley arrived home, Victor and Miller entered the room while Tatiana was present and attacked him. Ita Berley screamed for help, pleading with his mother, but she stood by, unmoved, until he collapsed. Tatiana's plan did not end there. When she found her son unconscious, she instructed the young men to kill him, but they refused. Determined to resolve what she saw as her son's unconventional tendencies, Tatiana went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and attacked him. Victor and Miller, horrified by what they witnessed, fled the house. Tatiana then went into the bedroom, where her husband was sleeping, and woke him up to help her dispose of the body. Together, they wrapped the body in a blanket, put it in the car, and drove to a remote, sparsely populated area with thick reeds along the road. There, they abandoned the body and returned home to clean up the scene. The next day, the couple returned to the location, doused the body with gasoline, and burned it to prevent identification. From that day on, Ita Berley's paternal relatives could no longer contact him. As time passed, his grandmother became increasingly worried. He did not call to update her on his reconciliation with his mother. She had expected him to join her for the New Year celebrations, as they had planned to celebrate together. With no news from Ita Berley, she asked his uncle to take her to Tatiana's house to inquire about Ita Berley. When they arrived at Tatiana's house, they found her calm. She explained that her son was not home because he had gone to a friend's house, and she had no further information about him. His grandmother was unsure whether to believe Tatiana or call the police. However, after several hours of being unable to contact her grandson, she decided to get the police involved. Ita Berley's grandmother believed that her grandson would not disappear without informing her, especially since they had planned to spend the holidays together. She was convinced that something serious had happened and felt an investigation was necessary. She shared all her suspicions with the police. Ita Berley's uncle Dario mentioned the strained relationship between Tatiana and her son. Furthermore, when questioned, Tatiana appeared surprisingly calm about the situation. Her lack of concern and failure to report her son missing raised suspicions. The police began an investigation, focusing primarily on Tatiana. A few days later, on January 7, 2017, a patrol discovered the burned body of a young man wrapped up and left in a rural area of São Paulo. The body had deep stab wounds, and an intact bracelet was found nearby. Police suspected the body was that of Ita Berley, who had recently been reported missing. They notified the boy's grandmother, who identified the bracelet as her grandson's. However, this alone was not sufficient to confirm the identity of the body. Investigators requested the Institute of Forensic Medicine to conduct a DNA test using genetic material from the boy's mother. Forensic experts determined that the victim had died approximately 10 days earlier. Police also concluded that the location where the body was discovered was not the crime scene, as no evidence was found there. On January 11, police searched Tatiana's home and discovered bloodstains on the sofa, bed, and walls. They also found 2 kitchen knives with bloodstains, suspected to be the murder weapons. Tatiana and her husband Alex were arrested. Confronted with the evidence and unable to deny it, Tatiana confessed to killing her eldest son, but provided a completely different version of events. She claimed that on the day she intended to reconcile with Ita Berley, he came home drunk and aggressive. According to Tatiana, he attacked her, her husband, and their 4-year-old son. Tatiana alleged that she and her husband acted in self-defense, killing their son because they believed he was a threat to their family. Out of fear, they disposed of the boy's body. However, the police did not believe this testimony. Contradictions in Tatiana's and Alex's accounts revealed that both were lying. Statements from relatives about Ita starkly contrasted with those of his mother. Tatiana described her son as problematic, accusing him of using illegal drugs, drinking excessively, avoiding work, and being disliked by the community. However, neighbors and acquaintances who knew Ita Berley and his paternal family described him as responsible, kind, considerate, polite, and well-liked. He also maintained a close circle of friends and avoided alcohol or drugs. The police gathered additional evidence linking Tatiana and Alex to Ita Berley's murder. A key piece of evidence was an attempt to delete a Facebook post written by Ita Berley, in which he mentioned being attacked. Fortunately, some of his friends had saved the post and turned it over to the police. Suddenly, Tatiana changed her story, adding 3 more people to the case: Victor, Miller, and a girl who acted as an intermediary for their communication. In this new version, Tatiana claimed that she had asked the young men to teach her son a lesson because he had threatened and attacked her. However, she alleged that the young men had killed her son without her consent while she was outside the house. She said she heard her son screaming for help, but when she returned, she discovered that the killers had fled. She then woke her husband, and together they disposed of the body. The defense argued that Tatiana had acted out of anger and self-defense, claiming that Berley had been aggressive and had previously attacked his mother. However, significant inconsistencies in Tatiana's story cast doubt on her claims. On January 13, the police arrested Victor, Miller, and the girl who had acted as an intermediary between Tatiana and the 2 men. The girl was also a witness to the crime. The testimonies of these young people differed significantly from Tatiana's version of events. According to the girl, Tatiana had confided in her several times that she was extremely angry with her son, whom she described as different from other boys. Tatiana expressed a desire to find someone to beat her son. The girl suggested her boyfriend and his friend, who were willing to do the job for a fee. Tatiana immediately hired them. The girl stated that after Victor and Miller left the house, Tatiana killed Ita Berley. She claimed to have witnessed this with her own eyes, seeing Tatiana take a knife and stab her son to death. Victor and Miller shared their version of events. Their testimonies were consistent and the police believed them. They stated that they did not receive any money from Tatiana and confirmed that they were not present at the murder, as they had already left the house by that time. After gathering all the evidence, on February 9, 2017, the prosecutor's office transferred the case to court on charges of murder. Tatiana and Alex were also charged with concealing a corpse. The couple's lawyer argued that Tatiana had acted in self-defense and that Alex had been asleep during the incident. However, the prosecutor contended that the crime was motivated by Tatiana's inability to accept her son's non-traditional tendencies. The court decided to detain Tatiana, Alex, Miller, and Victor. During the criminal proceedings, Tatiana remained in custody, while Alex and the two young men were transferred to the Santa Rosa jail. Following the court's decision to impose detention orders on all the defendants, Tatiana's defense lawyer resigned. A new attorney was appointed to represent her. The new attorney argued that Ita Berley had been a problematic child who had previously threatened to harm other family members. The attorney also claimed that Ita Berley's aunt had filed 2 complaints against him. However, the county police reported that no such complaints had been filed. The murder, as reported by the media, deeply shocked the community. Ita Berley's Facebook page quickly turned into a memorial site, filled with messages of grief and demands for justice. A few days later, the police conducted a reenactment of the crime, during which only Tatiana was present. During the reenactment, Tatiana was temporarily taken back to her home. She recounted the events of that day in detail, explaining how she had taken her son's life and identifying the location where she and her husband had dumped and burned the body. People gathered at the crime scene. Some accused Tatiana of being a heartless and cruel mother, while others came to her defense. Among those defending Tatiana was her mother, Ita Berley's grandmother. She asserting that Tatiana had acted in self-defense against her son, whom she described as disobedient and difficult to manage. The police no longer believed these claims, and the number of those opposing Tatiana grew significantly. 7 months after the murder, Ita Berley's body was finally returned to the family for a Christian burial during a 2-hour funeral service. Friends of Ita Berley gathered at the city cemetery to bid him farewell. Throughout the months of investigation, the police collected numerous statements from the family's neighbors. They confirmed that there were issues within the family, which escalated after Ita Berley revealed to his mother that he was different from other boys and that he did not like girls. Many neighbors reported frequent quarrels and incidents of domestic violence. They also claimed that Tatiana often bullied her son, even after he returned home bruised from being beaten by other children. On November 27, 2019, a jury convicted Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira of murder, sentencing her to 25 years and 9 months in prison. Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa were each sentenced to 21 years and 8 months in prison for their involvement in the brutal beating and indirect role in causing the death of Ita Berley. As for Tatiana's husband, Alex, his trial was postponed. Relatives of Ita Berley expressed relief, believing that justice had been served. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Laurel Mitchell. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born on May 24, 1958. She grew up in a loving and supportive environment with her 2 younger siblings, raised by their parents. The Mitchell family was very friendly, and many neighbors considered them the ideal American family. Despite the challenges they faced, the family remained close and worked together to overcome difficulties. From an early age, Laurel excelled in school and was part of a very religious family. She attended church regularly, with her parents and later with her siblings. Laurel was also creative and talented. She joined the local choir and practiced weekly. She achieved much success, performing with the choir in neighboring cities and participating in various community events. Committed to helping others, Laurel worked at a church camp near her home. Many of the attendees knew her well, having watched her grow up. Laurel was described as a friendly, positive girl, with a gentle yet strong personality. Those close to her believed that she had a bright future ahead. supported by her dedication to her family and community. On the morning of August 6, 1975, Laurel spent time caring for her younger brother and sister while waiting for their parents to return from work. In the afternoon, she was scheduled to go to church camp. Laurel left home around 2 p.m., said goodbye to everyone without incident, and arrived at camp on time, as usual. She was scheduled to work until around 10 p.m. that evening and then planned to go to a local park to relax with friends, which was half a mile from the church. After work, a friend of Laurel's offered to drive her to the park, but she declined, preferring to walk and enjoy the fresh air. About 10 minutes into her walk, she met some friends across the street who were having a good time. Although they waved goodbye, Laurel did not join them because she did not want to be late. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Meanwhile, her friends were waiting for her at the park. After 20 minutes had passed without Laurel, they began to worry. It was unusual for her to be late, as she was known to be punctual and usually arrived early. Concerned, her friends decided to wait a little longer, thinking that she might simply be running late for church. They waited for her, but after half an hour, they grew impatient and felt a little annoyed by her tardiness. Unable to wait any longer, they decided to go out and have fun without her. Meanwhile, they worried that something might have happened to her. Laurel's family was not worried at first because she had told them that she was going to meet her friends after work and planned to return around midnight, which was her curfew. Her parents allowed her to go out, but as midnight approached and she still had not returned, they began to worry. Both her mother and father became concerned, as did her friends. They realized that Laurel's behavior was unusual. Worried about her well-being, her parents decided to take action instead of waiting. Her mother immediately began trying to find out what had happened to her daughter. Knowing that 17-year-old Laurel was very close to her friends, most of whom lived nearby, her parents decided to contact them despite the late hour, as their worries had grown too great. Laurel's best friend lived right across the street, and they often spent time together, so when Laurel wasn't at her friend's house, her parents were surprised. At that time, her friend had returned home, which raised their concerns. After talking to her friend, Laurel's parents were shocked to learn that she had not gone to the park to meet them and that they had gone for a walk without her. Her parents searched for Laurel along the path she would have taken, but found no sign of her. They planned to go home, hoping that she would be back by then, but she did not return. Worried, the family began calling everyone they knew who might have seen Laurel. Despite the late hour, most people were sympathetic, but unfortunately, no one knew where she was. They eventually decided to call the police to report her missing. Sadly, the police responded with the usual excuses, saying that since Laurel was 17 and was supposed to be with friends, she may have run away due to a conflict with her parents or simply been with someone else. They speculated that she might have had too much to drink and was unable to return home. However, her parents insisted that this behavior was completely out of character for Laurel. Laurel spent most of her time at home and at church, but the police did not listen to their concerns. Determined to find Laurel, her parents and others spent nearly an hour at the police station trying to convince the officers that she would never have missed a meeting with friends or broken curfew. Eventually, the police seemed to take action. By this time, a large group of townspeople were anxious to know what had happened to Laurel. Everyone in the community knew each other, and the idea that a young girl could be in danger in such a quiet town, where nothing like this had ever happened, was shocking. Laurel's parents made a phone call, and a crowd gathered outside the police station, ready to help. Despite the late hour, the people were determined to search for Laurel along with the police. First, they checked the camp near the church, along the route Laurel had taken. However, they found no sign of her along the entire path she might have followed. Then the group split up and searched the city until dawn, but unfortunately, they still found no clues. By 10:30 a.m., the search of the homes of Laurel's friends, whom she was supposed to meet, was nearly complete. The hope that she had simply gone out to have fun had evaporated. Naturally, There was interest in the missing girl's relatives. The Mitchell family had made extensive efforts to identify any potential suspects in Laurel's vicinity. However, they ruled them out, one by one. Laurel had a good social circle, with no signs of cruelty or criminality. Her friends could provide no leads for the investigation. There were no suspicious boyfriends or manipulative individuals in her life, as she had never dated anyone or even thought about boys. There were no jealous suitors who could harm her. Rumors began to spread, and the local community started to pressure the police for answers. Eventually, the police learned that Laurel had met a group of friends about 10 minutes earlier and had passed by them. They reported that they had seen nothing unusual. Laurel seemed happy and was not being followed. So what could have happened to her? A few kilometers north of the city, a man was fishing with his son on the river. Everything seemed calm until he noticed something suspicious floating downstream. Out of curiosity, he decided to row his boat closer. To his horror, he discovered that it was the body of a girl. The man was terrified, thinking that she might have had an accident and drowned. He believed he could still save her, so he pulled her body into the boat and tried to help. However, he soon realized that she was too cold, despite the warm weather. When all his efforts failed, he brought her body to shore with his son. He spotted a passing car and asked the driver to call for help. At the time, Laurel Mitchell's disappearance had not yet been officially reported. Since she had no identification, it was difficult to identify her. The police responded to the call. It turned out that the man and his son were not from the area and did not know Laurel. The police noticed a ring with her initials engraved on her finger. A few hours later, Laurel was officially reported missing, and her initials confirmed her identity. Her parents were able to identify her immediately. Initially, there was an assumption that she may have accidentally fallen off the bridge, slipped, and drowned, possibly due to not knowing how to swim or being intoxicated. However, her parents quickly dismissed these thoughts. They knew that swimming was a regular part of Laurel's training. She had always loved water and enjoyed swimming since childhood, so she could have swum out of the reservoir if she had accidentally fallen in. Additionally, her family and friends confirmed that she had not been drinking. She had not intended to cross the bridge that night, as it was not on her route, making it unlikely that she had accidentally ended up there. Despite this, the police remained skeptical of the family's beliefs. Laurel was found in a large river with a strong current. In some areas, the current is so powerful that even professional swimmers avoid it. According to the police, Laurel may have fallen into the water or gone swimming and become a victim of the current. She may have been swept away and been unable to handle the situation. This theory is supported by the existence of areas marked as too dangerous to swim. Forensic experts were quick to dismiss the police's explanation. Laurel had numerous bruises indicating that she had been beaten, an apparent case of violent death. Many of her injuries appeared to be defensive wounds, particularly on her arms and upper chest. Her face and head were severely injured, suggesting that she had been struck with a blunt object. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, indicating an attempt to conceal the evidence by dumping her body in the river. The body had been submerged in water for a long time, causing most of the evidence to wash away. The remaining traces could not be thoroughly analyzed because DNA testing was still in its early stages, which caused the investigation to stall. Although the police had some evidence in the form of suspicious biological traces, they were too small to be of any use. All of the items recovered, such as Laurel's clothes, shoes, and underwear that showed these traces, were eventually stored. At the funeral, the church was so crowded that many attendees had to stand outside. People expressed their condolences to Laurel's family and hoped that the case would be solved soon. The investigation soon stalled and only made progress a few months later when an anonymous witness called the police from a public phone. She claimed to know what had happened to Laurel, but when the police began asking questions, she abruptly hung up and was never found again. The police made a public appeal to find the girl who had called them. They assured her that her identity would be kept confidential and that she would be safe, providing any protection she might need. They urged her to contact them again and share any information she had. To encourage her, they even offered a reward of $50,000, a substantial sum at the time. Despite this, the girl did not call back. Unfortunately, the reward led to trouble, as the police received some false information, wasting resources on unnecessary investigations. 6 months after Laurel's death, a woman contacted the police. She lived across the street from where Laurel had walked to the park that evening. She reported seeing Laurel at 10:15 p.m., the same time she was returning from work. While she was at home, she heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a car had stopped suddenly in front of her house, followed by the screams of young people. When she looked out the window, she saw one of the trunks slam shut. Laurel, who had disappeared from view for a moment, was seen by a housewife. The housewife noticed a red car with strange young men inside, who quickly drove away. Although she could not see the faces or the license plate, she provided a description of the car. It was a bright red car, quite recognizable at the time. The police were very interested in this information and began investigating all the car owners matching that description. However, for a month, they found no clues, much to the frustration of the police and Laurel's family. The investigation hit a dead end again. Decades later, in the early 2010s, advances in technology and methods, including genetic analysis, allowed for a more thorough examination of the available evidence. Profiling techniques were also used, leading to the creation of a psychological profile of the suspect. FBI agents were even brought in to assist. The profiler suggested that the suspect was likely a young man who lived in or near the area, had a history of violent crime, and possibly a criminal record. Despite these efforts, the investigation into Laurel's case made little progress. The DNA samples from the evidence were too limited to be analyzed comprehensively, hampering the police's efforts to solve the crime. During this time, a team was formed to tackle unsolved cases. Finally, the case of Laurel Mitchell came to the attention of her elderly parents. They once again expressed their desire to confront the brutal criminal who had beaten their innocent daughter to death. The police chose to restart the investigation, ignoring all the controversial conclusions from over 30 years ago. Sadly, Laurel's parents died before the police could answer their long-standing questions. As of 2012, the culprit remains unidentified. After the tragedy, Laurel's brother and sister were determined to continue their fight for justice. They believed that the media could help promote their efforts, so they issued several news reports about the investigation, which had been ongoing for nearly 4 years. A few months into their media campaign, they began to see progress with the police. A woman who had lived in the area in 1975 and was the same age as Laurel came forward to share her story. About a week after Laurel's murder, she had met a man named John Wayne Lehman at a party, and they had begun a long-term relationship. At another party, John confessed to her about a traumatic incident that had occurred that summer. He revealed that he had witnessed his friend attacking a girl on the street and felt helpless because he could not intervene. John gave a detailed account of the crime, but maintained that he did not kill Laurel. Instead, he claimed that it was his friend. At the time, she did not believe him. When she went to the police station and repeated what John had said, the police became interested. The information she provided about the attack and murder included details that had not been reported in the media, raising suspicions. Despite this, the investigation remained challenging. The woman mentioned that she had broken up with John shortly after his confession and that she did not know about his current situation. He was not listed in the police database, indicating that he had no legal problems. The police sought to identify John's friend. The woman struggled to remember her friend's name. To help her recall, the police provided her with a list of former suspects and potential witnesses in the case. She recognized the name Fred Bandy Jr. 2 years after Laurel's death, a young man came to the police station, stating that he had met Fred, who had no stable home, job, or education. He described Fred as having an anger problem that he could not control. During one of their meetings, Fred confided in him that a friend named John had attacked a girl on the street for no reason. When the girl fought back, Fred became angry and started hitting her. He continued to attack her even after she passed out and fell to the ground. Fred claimed that he lost control at that point, which ultimately led to the girl's death. To cover up their crime, they dumped the girl's body in the river. At the time, the police did not take the young man's testimony seriously because he could not provide the girl's name, making it impossible to verify his account. Initially, the police ignored the situation, but eventually remembered it. However, they did not take action because they could not verify his testimony. After reviewing the report, the police discovered that John Wayne Lehman and Fred Bandy Jr. were involved in the case. Now, the police decided to take a closer look at the main suspects. However, at this time, they still had no information about John or Fred. Finally, the police had advanced technology that could analyze even the smallest traces. In 2019, they decided to test all the evidence collected from Laurel's murder, including her clothes, shoes, underwear, and a ring. Contrary to expectations, the testing process took nearly a year, even with these improved methods. In February 2020, a major breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists discovered microscopic traces on Laurel's clothing that had gone unnoticed for decades. The authorities had enough samples from Fred, who had a history of violent crimes, and his DNA was stored in a database. They needed time to compare these samples. Unfortunately, the initial results only showed an 80% match, which was not conclusive enough, so the investigation continued. After conducting further analysis using different methods, they achieved a near 100% match with Fred's samples. Finally, in 2023, the decision was made to arrest Fred Bandy Jr. and his friend John Wayne Lehman. Police noted that Fred had a history of 3 violent crimes, all targeting young girls, but he had only been convicted of one of these crimes. Fred served a short sentence and was released. He has now admitted to attacking Laurel Mitchell and mentioned that his friend John owned a red car in 1975. He tried to blame John but could not explain why only his DNA was found on Laurel's body. Both men were arrested nearly 48 years after Laurel's murder. Laurel's younger brother and sister struggled to understand how the killers were able to live freely while the police failed to catch them all these years. It was expected that they would accuse each other. Fred blamed John for everything, while John insisted that Fred was responsible for abusing and killing Laurel and drowning her. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming that his fear of Fred had prevented him from intervening or speaking up until now. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury reached a decision. Within an hour, they found Fred Bandy Jr. guilty of first-degree murder. At the time, Fred was 69 years old. At the sentencing hearing that followed, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is important to note that Fred was tried under a 1975 law. At that time, he could have faced life in prison with the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, the death penalty has since been abolished in that state. As a result, Fred will spend the rest of his life in prison. John Wayne Lehman, who was 68 years old when he was arrested in Indiana, negotiated a deal with the prosecution by pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Because of his cooperation, John was sentenced to only 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. In exchange for this leniency, John had to testify for the prosecution during the trial. After the murderers were convicted, Laurel's 62-year-old younger sister released balloons into the sky that read, "We got him." This allowed the family to celebrate a long-overdue victory for justice. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Orville Fleming. Sarah June Douglas was born on August 4, 1987 in Sacramento, California, into a family with 5 siblings. As a child, she was a sweet, sociable, and cheerful girl with a deep love for nature. She had a particular fondness for animals, especially dogs and birds, and enjoyed spending time in the garden planting and caring for plants. However, her teenage years marked a dramatic change. Sarah became rebellious and mischievous, dropped out of school, abandoned her previous hobbies, and began spending most of her time with friends and attending parties. At the age of 19, she entered into a tumultuous relationship with a man and eventually became pregnant. In 2007, at the age of 20, Sarah gave birth to a son. Unfortunately, the child's birth did not resolve the conflicts between Sarah and her boyfriend, and they eventually decided to separate. Sarah had to adapt to life as a single mother with no formal education or career while taking care of her child. Over time, making ends meet became increasingly difficult, as finding a steady job that could support both her and her son proved to be a challenge. Although her mother and sister provided some support, Sarah continued to struggle financially. Eventually, she turned to providing intimate services on escort websites. Her sister described Sarah as a good person who made poor decisions, and this was one of the worst. While Sarah was able to alleviate her financial difficulties, this choice also exposed her to new and far more dangerous problems. After spending a few years working in the escort industry, Sarah met Orville Fleming, who provided financial stability and a secure home. Wanting to ensure a better future for her son, Sarah saw Orville as the salvation she had been hoping for. Orville Fleming, born on June 26, 1958 in California, had lived what appeared to be an exemplary life for over 30 years. He was a husband, father, and a dedicated firefighter with over 24 years of service. Due to his outstanding performance and leadership skills, Orville became a battalion chief. Orville also worked as an instructor at the fire academy. His career was flourishing, and his impeccable record qualified him for a substantial pension. Many considered Orville and Megan Fleming, his wife, who had been married for 30 years, to be the epitome of a successful, typical American couple. Together, they raised 2 children who had grown into responsible, successful adults. However, behind his seemingly perfect life, Orville was hiding a dark secret. A significant portion of his income was spent on one of his private indulgences, hiring escort services that he found on internet platforms. Despite being seen as a devoted husband and a dedicated civil servant in his 50s, Orville sought out intimate encounters with young women. On one of these websites, Orville met Sarah, a 24-year-old attractive young woman. Orville was immediately drawn to her during their first meeting. At the time, Sarah was using a different name on the website and charging $300 an hour for her services. It is said that during their meetings, Sarah gained Orville's trust by sharing stories about her difficult life as a single mother. Moved by her struggles, their relationship quickly developed. Orville became deeply infatuated with Sarah, to the point of obsession. Orville continued to care for Sarah and her son, but he felt that it was not enough. After some time, he suggested that they move in together, promising to leave his wife, marry Sarah, and take care of her child. True to his word, Orville divorced his first wife, Megan, and moved in with Sarah and her son in a house located in a quiet neighborhood in Fox River, south of Sacramento. Sarah shared with her family how happy she was with the changes in her life. Although her parents were initially concerned about the significant age gap between Sarah and Orville, they supported her and believed she had made the right choice. The new house also became a home for birds, as Sarah had loved them since childhood and could now devote her time to caring for them. She had quit her previous job to focus on taking care of Orville and her son. Their plans for marriage began when Orville gave Sarah an engagement ring with a large diamond. However, Their relationship soon began to deteriorate. Orville became possessive and extremely jealous. Knowing that Sarah was financially dependent on him, he used this to his advantage to control her and ensure she stayed by his side. After living together for 2 years, Sarah grew increasingly frustrated with her fiancé, who displayed obsessive and controlling behavior. She also frequently clashed with Megan, who was still Orville's legal wife despite him filing for divorce on October 24. Sarah's patience was wearing thin, and she began calling Megan repeatedly, even demanding that Megan pay off Orville's debt for the escort services Sarah claimed to have provided him. As 2014 approached, Orville and Sarah's relationship had deteriorated significantly. Sarah began spending more time with her mother and sister, confiding in them that she was seriously considering ending her relationship with Orville. Little did she know that her decision to leave would lead to a devastating tragedy. On Wednesday, April 30, 2014, Sarah sent her son to stay with his father for a few days and decided to spend time with her mother and sister. The 3 women went to a casino where they stayed until 11 p.m. During this time, Orville repeatedly called and texted Sarah. Around midnight, Sarah's sister dropped her off at the house she shared with Orville, not realizing it would be the last time she would see her sister alive. When Sarah entered the house, she immediately sensed something was wrong. A strong smell of gas filled the air. She quickly turned off the gas in the kitchen and called her sister, telling her that Orville had left the gas on, possibly in an attempt to harm her birds. While they were talking, Sarah's sister suddenly heard her scream, apparently startled by someone entering the room. Moments later, her sister heard Orville's voice, followed by the sound of arguing and Sarah's terrified scream. Thinking it was just another one of their usual arguments, her sister went to bed, planning to check on Sarah the next morning. The next morning, Sarah's sister tried calling her several times but received no response. At 8 a.m., Sarah's sister and aunt decided to go to her house. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Noticing that the door was unlocked, they cautiously entered the living room, only to find the house in disarray, with objects scattered everywhere. Feeling uneasy, they went to the master bedroom. What they found there horrified them so much that they ran out of the house in a panic. A neighbor, alarmed by the screams of Sarah's sister and aunt, quickly called 911 to report the incident. By 9 a.m., the police had arrived at the scene. Inside, they immediately noticed signs of a struggle. In the bedroom, they found a body lying face down on the floor next to the bed. The victim had visible stab wounds, and a cloth-like material was tied around her neck. The window shutters were closed, and no one else was in the house. The police quickly secured the area, called in forensic experts to collect evidence, and transported the young woman's body to the morgue. Sarah's sister and aunt were questioned and promptly identified the victim as Sarah June Douglas, 26. An autopsy revealed that Sarah had been attacked with a knife, possibly a kitchen knife. There were also clear signs of strangulation on her neck, along with bruises on her body, which indicated physical violence. Laboratory tests found no traces of alcohol or foreign substances in her system. Police learned from Sarah's sister that she lived with Orville and that their relationship had recently become strained. That night, Sarah had allegedly told Orville that she intended to end the relationship. Using details Sarah's sister overheard during a phone call, police began reconstructing the events that led to Sarah's tragic death. Orville Fleming became the prime suspect in Sarah's murder, leading to an arrest warrant being issued against him. However, Orville disappeared, and efforts to locate him were unsuccessful. A statewide search was conducted, and his official vehicle was found not far from his home, but his whereabouts remained a mystery. During the investigation, police discovered that Orville was in possession of 2 handguns that were missing from the scene. As a result, they warned the public that he was considered armed and extremely dangerous. Flyers were widely distributed, urging people to report any suspicious individuals. The police search continued for several days, with special units involved. Meanwhile, At the house where Sarah had died, relatives, friends, and acquaintances gathered to pay their respects and offer condolences to her family. The media closely followed the search and provided regular updates. On May 2, the police decided to reenact the events of that tragic night. Orville's relatives and colleagues were invited to participate, and those who knew him were shocked by his alleged involvement in such a terrible crime. They had always known him to be a kind, positive, and cheerful person, which made the accusations even harder to believe. A week after Orville disappeared, he was removed from his post due to being absent from work for more than 5 days. Meanwhile, the police redirected their search to remote areas of California where Orville might have traveled. They speculated that, as a nature enthusiast who frequently hiked in hard-to-reach areas, Orville might possess survival skills suited to such environments. During the ongoing search, Orville's wife Megan made a startling revelation. She claimed that Orville and other members of the California Fire Department had used escort services at the fire station. Megan stated that she had seen a video showing firefighters with women, including one identified as Sarah, inside the station's fire truck. However, when police searched the home Orville and Sarah shared, they found no such videos or photos. Megan went on to report that Sarah had been demanding money from her for the past 4 years to pay debts related to intimate services. Megan claimed that the situation escalated after Sarah discovered that the diamond ring Orville had given her was, in fact, a fake. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, Orville, a former fire battalion commander, was finally arrested on May 26, 2014. He was found at a bus stop near the woods where he had abandoned his car, suggesting that he had been hiding in the woods the entire time. When he attempted to catch a bus to get food, he was arrested without resistance. On May 20, 2014, Orville Fleming appeared in court. He claimed that he could not afford a lawyer and refused to plead guilty. 10 days later, the California Highway Patrol announced an investigation into alleged misconduct involving members of the fire department where Orville had worked. In October 2014, 4 months after the murder, Orville formally pleaded not guilty. Sarah's family, particularly her mother, was outraged by Orville's arrogance, as he even winked at his lawyer while proclaiming his innocence. Her family informed the court about Sarah's troubled relationship with Orville, describing him as a jealous and controlling husband who had forbidden her from working. At the same time, an investigation was launched into the fire academy where Orville had been an instructor. On December 29, 2014, evidence of misconduct was uncovered, resulting in the suspension of 16 firefighters. In June 2015, Orville's lawyers began their defense by attempting to portray him in the best possible light. They argued that he was a victim of manipulation by an escort service employee with a history of substance abuse. The defense claimed that the woman had exploited Orville for her own benefit until he reached his breaking point. They also asserted that he had amnesia and could not recall the attack itself. Through this narrative, the defense hoped to secure a reduced sentence. The next day, Orville alleged that Sarah was an alcoholic, used illegal drugs, and frequently yelled at and humiliated him. On the night of the incident, he claimed they had a heated argument, after which he lost control. He stated that he went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, returned to the room, pinned Sarah down on the bed, and stabbed and strangled her. Orville claimed he could not remember all the details of the incident and later expressed shock, saying he could not believe he had killed the woman he intended to marry. He also revealed that while on the run, he had attempted end life 3 times. Finally, the prosecutor presented their case. During questioning, Orville claimed he did not remember what had happened. However, the police had a recording from his arrest in which Orville clearly confessed that he had stabbed Sarah because she insulted him. The prosecution argued that Orville had sufficient time to comprehend his actions, making him eligible for first-degree murder charges. On June 24, 2015, Orville Fleming was convicted of second-degree murder. On July 31, He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Orville's crime not only deprived Sarah's 5-year-old son of the chance to grow up with his mother, but also exposed him to a media frenzy due to speculation about his mother's past. To shield the boy from public scrutiny and hostility, his father relocated him to Santa Rosa. Sarah's family suffered two devastating tragedies. First, Sarah's death shattered their hearts. Then, just months after Sarah's death, her brother, to whom she was very close, took his own life, unable to cope with the immense pain of losing her in such horrific circumstances. For Sarah's family, her death at the hands of a man she had been with for years was a stark warning to end abusive relationships before it was too late. It also highlighted that seemingly respectable and socially respected people can sometimes be far worse than those who are shunned. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Esmeralda Richie. Esmeralda Richie was born on August 23, 2006. Little is known about her childhood, but it is understood that she grew up in a loving family with her older sister. The family ran a small supermarket, where Esmeralda spent most of her time before attending the Agricultural Polytechnic Institute. She aspired to pursue higher education and dreamed of a modeling career, which she often showcased on social media. Esmeralda has an attractive appearance, giving her a great chance of success in this field. Esmeralda regularly shares funny and dancing videos on her social media, clearly enjoying her online presence and being in front of the camera. Her friends describe her as cheerful and kind, always ready to help others, which makes her popular. Unlike most teenagers, Esmeralda preferred to stay at home and invite her friends over rather than go out to various places. However, in the weeks leading up to the tragic incident, she suddenly began spending more time with her friends outside the house. This change in behavior confused her mother and sister. Her sister even suggested to their mother that they set some boundaries for Esmeralda, but her mother thought this was typical teenage behavior and did not see it as a cause for concern. However, the real problem was not her friends but her teacher, 30-year-old John Kelly Martinez. John had begun his teaching career after passing his teacher exam and started his probationary period in June 2022 at the academy where Esmeralda was in her final year. He initially taught mathematics but later volunteered to teach physical education, working with all groups, including Esmeralda's class. At that time, John was married with 2 daughters. He was known to be responsible and considerate, getting along with most of the students, and he was especially close to Esmeralda. At first, John and Esmeralda's relationship was merely that of a teacher and student. However, over time, John developed a special interest in her and gained her trust. One day during recess, John sat down next to Esmeralda and her friends and began asking strange questions, such as who the girls lived with, whether they had boyfriends. Unfortunately, the students did not notice John's strange behavior. Soon, he began inviting Esmeralda to meet him outside of school, often bringing other students along to avoid attracting attention. On February 12, 2023, John planned to go for a walk along the beach that evening with his nephew and 3 of Esmeralda's friends. However, since Esmeralda's parents did not allow her to go out at night, she was worried that her mother would not permit her to join them. To resolve this issue, she asked John to pick her up and help convince her mother. John agreed and arrived at Esmeralda's house around 7:30 p.m. in his black Honda, accompanied by his nephew and 3 friends. They went inside to talk to Esmeralda's mother about allowing her to go for a walk to a nearby horse show. At first, her mother was hesitant. However, after considering that Esmeralda would be with her teacher and classmates, Esmeralda's mother finally agreed to let her go. She did not know that this decision would have serious consequences for her daughter. That evening, Esmeralda's father returned home from church and found that Esmeralda was missing. When he asked his wife where she was, Esmeralda's mother explained that she had allowed Esmeralda to go for a walk. Esmeralda's father became angry, but she assured him that Esmeralda was with her teacher and classmates. As the night wore on and it became 11 p.m., Esmeralda still had not returned. Esmeralda's father called her, and surprisingly, she answered immediately, saying that she was on her way back from the beach and would be home in 10 minutes. Her father went outside to wait for her because she did not have her keys. A few minutes later, Esmeralda arrived home, accompanied by a friend and John. After seeing the girls off, John left immediately. Esmeralda's parents found her looking worried and pale, almost too weak to walk. Her friend helped her into the room and laid her down. Worried about her condition, her mother asked if Esmeralda had been drinking. Esmeralda replied that she had only had a sip of wine, which upset her mother. Esmeralda's father began scolding her for coming home late. During the argument, Esmeralda got up to go to the bathroom. Her mother then noticed a red stain. When her mother asked about it, Esmeralda said that she had just started her period. Her mother found this strange because she believed her daughter had finished her period a few days earlier. Nevertheless, she chose not to question the matter further. On the morning of February 13th, Esmeralda sent a text message to her friend asking for help, saying that she was bleeding. Around 6 a.m., Esmeralda's mother noticed that her daughter had not yet woken up for school. She knocked on Esmeralda's bedroom door, expecting her to wake up, but there was no answer. Worried, her parents entered the room and were horrified to find it empty and the bed covered in blood. They rushed into the bathroom and discovered Esmeralda. When they ran closer to check, her parents found that Esmeralda was dead. Overwhelmed with grief, they called the police. The police arrived, and around 8 a.m., Esmeralda's body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medicine for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Her family was shocked, not knowing the details, but they suspected that something terrible had happened the night she went out. They discovered several text messages on Esmeralda's phone to her friend, indicating that a hard object had been inserted into her genitals, along with a voice message asking for help. At the time, the family was unaware of Esmeralda's relationship with John, but they quickly identified him as the prime suspect, prompting an investigation into the events of that night. The parents of 3 teenage girls who were with Esmeralda that night turned over their cell phones to the police to assist in the investigation. The police found several text messages from Esmeralda's friend, who drove her home, indicating that Esmeralda had begun bleeding from the 5 pills John had provided to induce an abortion. Esmeralda's friends urged her to go to the hospital, but she refused. Text messages showed that she had passed out several times while in John's car on the way home. The girls' phones also displayed messages from John asking about Esmeralda's condition. On the morning of Tuesday, February 14th, John was arrested and taken to the police station as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. The Department of Education suspended him for 90 days without pay to allow the investigation to proceed. During the search of John's home, his nephew was also arrested for attempting to conceal clothing, specifically the shirt, pants, and shoes that John had been wearing that night. Meanwhile, the chief prosecutor interviewed the 3 girls who were with Esmeralda. Their testimony was crucial for the police in piecing together the events of that night. They reported that they initially drove around the area, but at some point, John stopped at a store where he bought some beer and pills. When he returned to the car, he told Esmeralda to move from the back seat to the front. They then drove over 60 kilometers to the beach. John poured beer into a thermos and added some unidentified pills before giving them to Esmeralda. She indicated that she did not know what was in the thermos besides the beer. When they reached the beach, everyone got out of the car except for John and Esmeralda. After about half an hour, John called the group to say it was time to head back. On the way, Esmeralda asked to stop at a gas station so she could use the restroom. When her friends joined her, they noticed that her clothes were covered in blood. Everyone rushed to help Esmeralda. The gas station manager saw the situation and informed John of what was happening, causing him to panic and say that they might be in trouble and needed to take Esmeralda home. Her friends decided to buy her a new outfit. As they drove to Esmeralda's house a few miles away, they needed to stop at a friend's house to change Esmeralda's clothes again. The prosecutor's office obtained surveillance camera footage from the gas station where the girls said they had stopped that night. The video confirmed that the car had indeed stopped there, and the manager corroborated the girls' claim. A few days later, forensic experts examined the area and found traces of human blood where the girls had indicated. Police also discovered another stop at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they obtained surveillance camera footage and John's purchase receipt. The receipts showed that he had purchased water, medicine, and disposable towels for the woman. While the investigation was still ongoing, Esmeralda's funeral was held. Friends and family said their final goodbyes, remembering her as a fun-loving and loving young woman. Her sister stood by the coffin, deeply saddened. Esmeralda was buried in the city cemetery according to Christian tradition. During the burial, her parents expressed deep sorrow at their loss. They lamented that their daughter had not confided in them about her troubles or sought help, believing that if she had, she might still be alive. Esmeralda's sister mentioned that she had frequently asked Esmeralda about her relationship with the teacher, but Esmeralda always denied any relationship. Their father stated that he had never met John before that tragic night and insisted that if he had been home, he would have prevented this situation from occurring. There are many theories about Esmeralda's death. Some believe she died of a heart attack, while others think it was due to blood loss from the abortion pill that John gave her after their encounter. These speculations were put to rest when the autopsy results were released. The report revealed that Esmeralda died from a ruptured vagina, which resulted in severe bleeding and hemorrhagic shock due to the abuse. The hemorrhagic shock eventually damaged Esmeralda's heart, preventing it from pumping enough blood. The doctor who performed the autopsy insisted on conducting toxicology tests to rule out pregnancy. At the time of her death, her family was confident that the results would be negative, believing that Esmeralda and John's encounter that night was their first and last. The family's attorney stated that regardless of the test results, they would seek a more thorough investigation. Esmeralda's family conducted their own tests, which returned different results than those of the state medical examiner based on evidence collected by the police on February 20th. As a result, the prosecutor's office sought to charge John and also requested the arrest of his nephew, Robiel Murillo Martinez, as an accomplice. The prosecution's theory was that John drugged Esmeralda that night to assault her, causing injuries that eventually led to her death hours later. Robiel allegedly knew about the incident. However, the attorneys for John and his nephew argued that the prosecutors did not have enough evidence to hold both men in custody and requested their release. The defense attempted to blame Esmeralda's parents for her death, claiming they were angry that Esmeralda had been with John and his nephew that night. After reviewing the evidence presented at trial, the judge ordered John to be held in a correctional rehabilitation center for 12 months before the trial. Robiel was required to report regularly to the police station. Additionally, the girls who were with Esmeralda that night were summoned to assess their involvement and potential punishment. This court decision helped to defuse tensions, but the lawyer warned that Esmeralda's body might need to be exhumed for further forensic examination. A few days later, the case was again thrust into the spotlight when an audio recording, allegedly made by one of John's daughters, began circulating online. In this recording, the daughter defended her father, claiming that Esmeralda was not abused because she willingly got into John's car. Meanwhile, John's wife faced a separate scandal after she sold her husband's car for about $14,000 shortly after his arrest. On March 28, the prosecutor's office confirmed that John's wife had sold the car and expected to receive the remaining payment later. Police also seized a handgun that had been sold to John by a woman. John's wife was arrested on suspicion of involvement in the crime and concealing evidence, but was released hours later due to a lack of evidence against her. The investigation continues. In the following months, police worked to gather evidence to confirm John's involvement in Esmeralda's death. During a second search of John's home, they discovered a box of birth control pills containing levonorgestrel, the same active ingredient found in Esmeralda's body. Additionally, brown women's pants, a dark blue blouse, and a white napkin were collected from the house. Several pieces of blue plastic bags and other items were collected and sent for forensic examination. Subsequent analysis determined that the clothing belonged to Esmeralda. On November 24, 2023, judge ordered that John be tried as the sole defendant in the case concerning Esmeralda's death. The judge dismissed the charges of illegal possession of a weapon, leaving him to be tried only for the charges of deprivation of life and abuse related to Esmeralda. A judge from the Superior Court will decide John's sentence. In contrast, all charges against Rubio Murillo Martinez were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The prosecution and Esmeralda's family lawyers have expressed their intention to appeal this decision. The trial was originally scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was postponed. The hearing finally began on January 15, with the press barred from attending. The hearing commenced with the reading of the indictment, followed by testimony from witnesses. Esmeralda's parents were the first to speak. They expressed their deep love for their daughter and their immense grief at losing her. Esmeralda's father directed his comments at John, emphasizing that John had relied on his role as an educator and child advocate. After the emotional testimony from Esmeralda's family, John spoke. He tries to play the victim, admitting to being intimate with Esmeralda but insisting it was consensual. He also claimed that he had brought her home alive and unharmed. The prosecution argued that Esmeralda died as a result of fatal injuries inflicted by John. To support their case, the prosecution presented 40 pieces of evidence, including witness statements, audio and video material collected during the investigation, and photos and videos of Esmeralda with John, as well as Esmeralda's autopsy report. After all the evidence was presented, the prosecution and Esmeralda's family attorney requested a prison sentence for John. They also attempted to add an additional charge, alleging that he had committed the crime of torturing a minor. However, this charge was dismissed by the judge. On March 14, 2024, the court found John Kelly Martinez guilty and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. He was ordered to pay Esmeralda's family $33,000 in restitution, along with a $3,400 fine. After the verdict, John apologized to Esmeralda's parents and the public for his actions. Although no sentence could bring Esmeralda back, the verdict brought relief to her family. They expressed their gratitude to everyone involved in the investigation and trial and stated that they were satisfied with the outcome. Esmeralda's mother described her daughter as a cheerful and happy girl. After her death, her mother tried to call her many times, struggling to accept the loss. Esmeralda's father used to wake her up every morning, but now he will never have that chance again. Both of Esmeralda's parents pray for the strength to overcome their grief, but they find it difficult to forgive John. Esmeralda's tragic story has deeply affected many people. Her life ended, highlighting the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries in the teacher-student relationship. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Marabel Ramos. California is one of the most prominent states in the United States, known for its warm climate, beautiful beaches, and world-class entertainment industry. Many come to California with hopes of building a better life. However, not everyone achieves their dreams. For some, California can be a land of promise, but for others, it presents harsh challenges. Marabel Ramos had a long-term goal of entering law enforcement. However, she needed to obtain a higher education, and to afford that, she joined the military. Marabel served 2 combat tours in Iraq and planned to graduate from California State University, Fullerton, with a degree in criminal justice. A veteran of the U.S. Army, she had served for 8 years and was looking forward to returning to civilian life. Marabel knew her goals and was determined to achieve them. After her military service, she shifted her focus to new opportunities, including her desire to enroll at a university in California. Orange, California, where she lived until her mother's passing in 2009. Then, Marabel reached out to her sister, Lucy, asking if she could move in with her. Lucy declined, explaining that she and her daughter were settled in a different location, but she would consider moving in with Marabel if she was unable to find a roommate. To find a roommate, Marabel placed an advertisement and soon received several responses. One inquiry stood out: a man named Kwang Choi Joy, who described himself as seeking a place to stay while job hunting. After meeting Kwang, both Marabel and Lucy found him to be calm and educated. He mentioned to the sisters that he had never been married and had no children. After Kwang moved in with Marabel, it quickly became evident that he was quite isolated. He spent a lot of time alone at home and rarely ventured outside. To help him connect, Marabel started inviting Kwang to family gatherings, dinners, games, and parties, where he met many of her relatives. Over time, Marabel began to change her routine and started participating in a weekly softball game, which was unusual for her. On May 2013, she disappeared when she failed to show up for a scheduled event. Marabel's family and friends made several attempts to reach her, but none were successful. They checked her apartment but found no sign of her. Concerned, they reported her missing, prompting the authorities to launch an investigation. Police officers visited Marabel's apartment but received no response after knocking on the door. Everything outside seemed normal, with no signs of trouble. There were no broken windows or indications of a break-in. As a result, the officers decided to enter the apartment to search for Marabel. There were no indications of a crime at Marabel's home. A search revealed that she was not packing for a trip. All her clothes were neatly in place, except for her mobile phone, wallet, and identification. Since Marabel's car was parked outside, investigators had their suspicions. Marabel was not the kind of person to vanish without a trace, which raised concerns that she might be in danger. When investigators arrived, Kwang Choi Joy unexpectedly approached them. He mentioned that he had last seen Marabel the previous night around 10 p.m. when he returned from a walk. In the video from the surveillance camera that evening at 8:15 p.m., Marabel had received a check for her apartment, which was the last time she was seen in public. She calmly accepted the envelope and left, showing no signs of fear or urgency. At that time, Marabel's family turned to social media for assistance. They shared a photo of Marabel online, asking anyone with information about her to reach out. They aimed to engage as many people as possible in the search. Meanwhile, investigators attempted to track Marabel's mobile phone, but it had been turned off. During their investigation, the police learned that Marabel had recently started dating a man named Paul Lopez. He was the last person to speak with her on the phone the day before she went missing. As a result, the police asked Paul to come to the station for questioning. Paul appeared confident and explained that he and Marabel were still in the early stages of their relationship. He also mentioned that he was dating other women. When asked if Marabel was seeing anyone else, Paul said he had not inquired about that. He confirmed that he spoke with Marabel on Thursday evening and noted that he was working a shift from 4 p.m. until midnight that day, so they did not meet in person. Investigators observed that while he was cooperative, there was no assurance that he was being truthful. However, Paul's truck had a GPS tracker, allowing officers to monitor his movements that night. The data revealed that Paul was not near Marabel's home. Paul mentioned Marabel's roommate Kwang, noting that their relationship had recently deteriorated. He recounted that Marabel often complained about Kwang's inability to pay rent on time. During a conversation, Paul overheard Marabel tell Kwang that she wanted him to move out the next day. In a speakerphone call, Paul warned Kwang that he would be kicked out if he didn't leave as instructed. Paul offered to help Marabel and said he would come over if she needed assistance, but she declined, stating it wasn't necessary. This was their final conversation. After the conflict between Marabel and Kwang became known, investigators learned that Kwang, who was 54 years old, had moved to the United States from South Korea as a teenager. He had no significant criminal record, and there was nothing indicating any illegal activities in his past. However, further investigation uncovered a history of anger issues. Kwang's sister had once filed a complaint against him due to his volatile temper. While examining his social media, investigators noted that Kwang and Marabel Ramos appeared to share a close bond. Nevertheless, when they spoke with Marabel's family, they learned that her relationship with Kwang was not as ideal as it seemed in their social media photos. It appeared that although they shared a friendly relationship, Kwang desired something deeper. In the summer of 2012, Lucy received a call from Kwang, who admitted that he was in love with Marabel and was trying to find her because of this. Lucy later informed Marabel about the conversation and urged her to promptly reject Kwang's feelings before things escalated. Marabel then spoke with Kwang, making it clear that she did not have romantic feelings for him. At first, Kwang seemed to handle the rejection well. However, as time passed, he began taking extreme actions to win Marabel over. He changed his wardrobe, got a tattoo, and spent over $10,000 on plastic surgery to appear younger. Police discovered alarming evidence, a frantic phone call from Marabel to them just 12 days before she went missing. In the call, Marabel expressed that she felt unsafe around her roommate. To understand the relationship between Marabel and Kwang, investigators brought him in for questioning. He appeared calm and friendly, expressing concern over her disappearance. Kwang claimed they had been roommates for about a year and a half, sharing enjoyable experiences like cruises, dancing, and parties. However, investigators suspected that the reality was not as ideal as Kwang portrayed it, and pressed him to explain Marabel's 911 call. Kwang mentioned that he and Marabel went to karaoke that night and ended up arguing. He noted that Marabel's behavior when drinking alcohol could be either very friendly or aggressive. When detectives asked about the argument, Kwang mentioned that it occurred on Thursday evening and was about the rent. He believed the detectives should investigate further, since he last saw Marabel at 9 p.m. when he took a drive to cool off after their disagreement. When he returned, she was missing, and he thought someone might have taken her away, because her car was still in its place. Although Kwang's account seemed believable, some aspects of his appearance raised suspicions. He claimed he had scratched himself on bushes while walking in the park, which seemed odd. At this stage of the investigation, there was no evidence that Kwang was involved in Marabel's disappearance. As days passed, the search for Marabel became increasingly difficult, and the likelihood of finding her alive decreased. To uncover new evidence, detectives decided to involve forensic experts to thoroughly examine Marabel's home, hoping they would find clues that were previously overlooked. During this time, Kwang cooperated with the police, allowing them to search his rented car without a warrant, including a detailed inspection by a police dog trained to detect human remains. However, the dog did not find any traces in the house or the vehicles. Meanwhile, a few days after Marabel's disappearance, Kwang expressed his feelings of missing his friend on forums dedicated to the case. Despite his attempts to portray himself as a grieving roommate, Kwang began to distance himself from Marabel's family, whom he had previously considered friends. He also declined to participate in most vigils and searches for her. This behavior raised red flags for investigators, who hoped he would slip up and reveal information about Marabel. Kwang visited a public library to use the internet since he had given his phone and laptop to the police. Detectives requested surveillance footage, which showed nothing unusual. He used the laptop for about 2 hours before returning it. They were eager to check the browser history on the laptop, but it had been cleared to protect users' privacy after it was returned, adding to the police's frustrations as they continued their efforts to find Marabel. Marabel's family were devastated when Marabel went missing, and no one knew where she had gone or what had happened to her. In their desperation, her family put up flyers throughout the city, hoping someone might have seen her or have information about her whereabouts. However, this effort was not enough. Realizing they needed to reach a wider audience, they created a social media account to share Marabel's situation and ask for help from anyone who might know something about Marabel. For 2 weeks, the police had no leads on her disappearance. Then, an unexpected development occurred. Marabel's family announced on social media that they would organize a walk and search for her in Modjeska Canyon. At that time, detectives discovered that Kwong had returned the rented car, which raised their suspicions. They decided to search the car again. During the first search, the police dog did not detect any scent, but this time it quickly reacted to a smell coming from the trunk. While this evidence was not enough to make an arrest, it indicated to the detectives that they were on the right track. When Kwong went to the library to use the laptop again, he saw on Facebook that Marabel's family was organizing a walk-and-search event in Modjeska Canyon. Unbeknownst to him, the police had obtained a warrant that allowed them to remotely access the laptop he was using. Detectives were able to see his search history, which included queries about how long it takes for a human body to decompose. He also looked up the location in the canyon where Marabel's family planned to gather for the search. After searching on Google Maps, he zoomed in and out of the area, which was 10 miles away from Modjeska Canyon. The officers following his actions were shocked. It became clear that Kwong had inadvertently revealed to them the location where he had hidden Marabel's body. Investigators quickly arrived at a remote area with no nearby houses. After searching for 30 minutes, they discovered a shallow grave. While they suspected the remains belonged to Marabel, they needed forensic confirmation before arresting Kwong. Forensic experts confirmed the victim's identity using dental records. The remains were indeed those of Marabel Ramos. Due to various animals in the environment, determining the exact cause of death was not possible. When Kwong noticed the approaching officers, he attempted to escape by jumping out of a window, but was apprehended and taken to the police station. He continued to deny any involvement in Marabel's disappearance, unaware that the police had already identified her remains. Kwong was charged with multiple offenses. Marabel's family continued to cherish her memory, yet it became clear that the circumstances surrounding her death were too uncertain to reach a conclusion. Authorities could only speculate on how she might have died at Kwong's hands. Prosecutors claimed that Kwong was in love with Marabel, while she did not reciprocate his feelings. Given Marabel's combat training, which could have allowed her to easily overpower Kwong in a fair fight, it was assumed he must have set up an attack. Investigators believed he entered her room during the night and suffocated her while she slept. He then reportedly placed her body in the trunk of his rented car and drove to a secluded spot where he had to crawl under a taut wire. Although there was a possibility that he moved Marabel's body multiple times, there was no evidence to support that theory. Additionally, very little forensic evidence connected Kwong to the crime. In court, Kwong did not plead guilty. He expressed that he would not apologize for something he insisted he did not do. He stated that he had never searched for the grave's location in the canyon and suggested that someone was framing him. He claimed he had nothing to contribute and maintained that he was not involved in Marabel's death. Kwong proposed that Marabel might have died from an illness after years of struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder and feelings of paranoia. The prosecutors acknowledged that the case was largely circumstantial, highlighting that key evidence included a library search that focused on the specific area where Marabel's body was discovered. He was held in the Orange County Jail on a $1 million bail. In July 2014, the court found Kwong Choi-joy guilty of murdering Marabel Ramos. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He continues to maintain his innocence. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Paulson. Jennifer Paulson was born on June 23, 1979, in Washington, USA. She grew up in a close-knit family filled with love and warmth. Jennifer has 2 older brothers and shares a strong bond with them. She was a kind child who absorbed everything around her and made friends easily. As a result, she had a large circle of friends and could connect with anyone, regardless of their differences. Jennifer graduated from the Christian Academy, where she excelled academically. She was always eager to help her classmates who were struggling with their studies. In addition to her academic achievements, Jennifer was active in extracurricular activities. She published the weekly school news, tutored part-time, and participated in volleyball, basketball, and softball. A prominent feature of Jennifer and her family was their strong faith. She attended church services every Sunday. After graduating, she attended Seattle Pacific University, about an hour's drive from her parents' home. She set her sights on becoming a teacher, wanting to use her academic achievements to help her community. She excelled in school, earning a bachelor's degree in teaching and then a master's degree in education. During her time in college, Jennifer also volunteered with low-income families, focusing on helping children prepare for college. She has always believed that education is the key to building a successful future. After graduating, Jennifer sought employment and began her career as a substitute teacher at Pierce County Schools. Eager to advance her career, she worked hard to secure a permanent teaching position. She was soon hired by several schools, and in 2004, she became a full-time teacher at Hunt Middle School and Stanley Elementary School. In 2007, she joined Bernie Elementary School, where she dedicated herself to teaching children with special needs and quickly became a favorite among the 5th graders. She believed that everyone deserved a chance at a better future, and helping them achieve that was her true calling as a teacher. She worked with students who faced serious challenges, including 5th graders who were still unable to read. Jennifer had an extremely busy schedule, balancing her teaching responsibilities with her efforts to support her students. While still attending college, she worked part-time at the cafeteria on campus. There, she met a new transfer student from another school named Jed Waits. He also worked at the cafeteria, and those who knew him well had nothing negative to say about him. One striking trait that people who don't know Jed will notice is his unusual style of dress. He often appears somber and frequently wears black. His friends believe that this preference for dark clothing stems from his creative eccentricity, which has been evident since a young age. Jed is an artist involved in a variety of creative activities. He has acted in plays, drawn cartoons for newspapers and yearbooks, and enjoys creating posters and flyers for youth groups. Jed is artistically gifted and can quickly come up with unique creative projects and execute them efficiently. This ability has earned him the respect of his teachers. Additionally, he leads his church's youth group and meets with students monthly to discuss spiritual topics and explore the Bible. Overall, he is a kind and optimistic person. When Jennifer met Jed, they worked together and socialized in the same group, where others often found Jed uncomfortable to talk to. His jokes were frequently considered inappropriate, dark, and confusing. Additionally, he was sometimes rude, even to Jennifer. Although there was no romantic relationship between them, it was clear that Jed had feelings for her. Jennifer, on the other hand, showed no interest in pursuing any relationship. She focused on her studies and had found a job that took up most of her free time. One day at school, Jed decided to express his feelings for Jennifer by asking her out. However, she reiterated what she had told many others before: she was not ready for a relationship until she had established her career. Jed struggled with the rejection, and in a moment of anger, he hit Jennifer, which caused a conflict between them. They resolved their differences amicably but chose to distance themselves, continuing their studies like other students. Both Jennifer and Jed graduated in 2003, with Jennifer earning a degree in special education and Jed earning a degree in English. Their friendship never recovered. In fact, they barely spoke to each other during their final years of school. After graduating from college, Jennifer moved back home with her family, found a job, and began saving money to buy her dream home. She was focused on her goals and wanted to be independent. However, An old acquaintance disrupted her plans. Somehow, Jed Waits discovered Jennifer's home phone number and called her for the first time 2 years after graduation. He said he had served in the National Guard in Kuwait and had just returned from a war zone. Jennifer was polite throughout the conversation and hoped he wouldn't call again, but from that day on, he started calling her frequently. At first, she ignored the calls, thinking he was just bored and contacting everyone, including her. However, she soon became concerned when Jed began calling multiple times a day, distracting and annoying her. When she asked their mutual friends, she learned that Jed didn't call anyone else. Realizing this made her feel uncomfortable, it seemed like he was obsessing over her, which was alarming. Jennifer told Jed that their relationship was impossible and asked him to stop contacting her. However, it seemed like he wasn't listening. Jed continued to call, forcing Jennifer to turn off her phone to avoid his constant calls. Thankfully, her family supported her during this difficult time. Meanwhile, Jed's parents had separated and moved in with new partners. By the fall of 2006, Jennifer Paulson had saved enough money for a down payment on a house and decided to buy one. She found a suitable place a few miles away from her family and was excited to be independent. She also hoped that the move would stop Jed's calls. To her surprise, just a few days after moving into her new home, she answered the phone and heard his familiar, annoying voice. She hadn't even finished unpacking when the calls started again. For days, she ignored him, hoping that this would stop Jed's obsession. However, her relief did not last long. After a while, he continued to call her persistently. This situation reminded Jennifer of her past experiences, and surprisingly, Jed stopped stalking her for about a year. During this time, Jennifer was able to relax and thought that Jed might have found someone else. However, she was shocked when he called her back, acting as if nothing had changed, as if they had just met yesterday. From that point on, Jed continued to contact her regularly, calling about 10 times a day or even more. This pattern of behavior continued for several months before stopping for a long period. This pattern of harassment occurred several times over the years, following a similar trajectory each time. In 2008, Jed started calling her again, and this time it was even more disturbing because he had become more aggressive. Jennifer had no idea how far his obsession had gone until he showed up at her workplace. He casually walked past her office and entered without hesitation. This was the most terrifying experience for Jennifer. She realized that she had never told him where she worked, which meant he had been stalking her. Jed coming to her school and walking among the children terrified her. When she told her father, Ken Paulson, what was happening, he was fed up with Jed's constant harassment. Ken later called Jed and asked him to stay away from his daughter, warning him that there would be consequences if he didn't. Instead of staying away, Jed sent Jennifer a gift at work, a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear. He later visited her in person again. During this meeting, Jennifer confronted him and asked him to stop coming to the school, warning that she would report him to the police if he continued to stalk her. She was genuinely worried about his obsessive behavior. Jennifer then informed the principal and school staff about the situation because she was concerned for the safety of the students. Everyone was alerted and prepared to call the police if he showed up at the school again. Unfortunately, Jed did not stop. The police were called to the school, and the principal was extremely concerned about the situation. He even contacted Jed's commanding officer in the National Guard, who revealed that Jed had a troubled military background. The commanding officer stated that Jed had served for nearly 2 years, but he had been behaving inappropriately from the beginning. During that time, he had gotten into several fights, spat on his teammates, and attacked his superiors. He was eventually deployed to Kuwait, where he finished his service without any commendation. The main reason for his discharge was a serious mental health issue. Jennifer became extremely concerned for her safety due to Jed's disturbing behavior. She then decided to file for a restraining order. In the application, she detailed Jed's inappropriate behavior, including repeated phone calls and unusual visits to her workplace. Jennifer Paulson was granted a restraining order, which legally prohibited Jed from coming within 300 meters of her, either at home or at work. While the order provided some peace of mind, Jennifer knew that it would not fully protect her if the harassment continued. She hoped that the police would respond more forcefully, which eased her concerns somewhat. Although she was frightened, she was prepared to take legal action against Jed if necessary. Jed was informed of the restraining order and the serious consequences he would face if he violated it. By this time, Jennifer was emotionally exhausted and showing signs of stress, but with the restraining order in place, she felt more secure in her life. Jennifer was shocked to see Jed's car honking at her in her rearview mirror. She quickly called 911 and explained that there was a restraining order against him and that she felt threatened. Eventually, the police advised her to drive calmly to the station. When she arrived, the police and their cars were waiting for Jed, who was arrested and taken in for immediate questioning. However, he denied the charges and refused to admit to any allegations related to stalking. While awaiting a court decision, the judge ordered Jed to be held in jail but set bail at $10,000. Normally, bail for such charges is around $2,000, but Jed's unpredictable and dangerous behavior prompted the judge to increase it significantly. Unfortunately, this precaution did not keep Jed in jail, as he was able to post bail. For days after his arrest, Jennifer and her family learned that he had been released. Everyone was in a panic. Jennifer chose not to return home, where she would be alone, and she did not go to work until the situation was resolved. She decided to stay with her family for support during this uncertain time. Jennifer decided to visit her mother. When she arrived, her mother greeted her in tears, expressing her fear that Jed would prevent her from entering the house. Jennifer was also very emotional but immediately expressed her desire to pray for Jed in this situation. She remained optimistic and kind, following her family's advice and staying with relatives. Her brothers planned to protect her at home by taking turns watching over her. However, Jennifer did not want to be confined to the house. She planned to continue working and could not abandon her students. On Friday at 7:30 a.m., Jennifer went to work, preparing to teach her first class of the day. About 400 students, from grades 1 through 5, along with teachers and staff, were at the school, unaware that they were in grave danger. Since 5:30 a.m., Jed had been nearby, parked in a hidden spot while he monitored the roads leading to the school, waiting for the right moment to approach his target. Jennifer arrived safely at work, parked in her usual spot, and walked toward the school. Everything seemed normal. Meanwhile, Jed got out of his car. As he approached her, he suddenly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back. She screamed and collapsed on the asphalt, and he shot her 7 more times. A man who lived across the street witnessed the horrific scene through his window. He heard her scream but couldn't get there in time to help her. Jed then pointed his gun at a passerby and fired, but the man miraculously dodged the bullet. News outlets reported on the shooting at the school where Jennifer worked, urging locals to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary, as the shooter had fled. At the time, no details were available about the victims. Jennifer's father received a call, and her parents quickly drove to the school. They were horrified to learn that Jed had finally achieved his goal and were even more devastated to learn of Jennifer's death. The attack caused chaos, allowing the perpetrator to flee by car. Fortunately, several witnesses saw his face and got a good look at the car he used to escape. He was quickly identified as Jed Waits, the person against whom Jennifer had a restraining order. Only 20 minutes had passed when one of the patrol officers stopped Jed's car about 10 kilometers from the school where he had just killed Jennifer Paulson. The officers were cautious during the arrest, but the situation quickly escalated. Jed refused to surrender. He pulled out a gun and opened fire on the officers. Fortunately, the officers were prepared and returned fire immediately. Thankfully, no officers were injured. Jed was found to be carrying multiple weapons, possibly because he had anticipated a confrontation with the police. The patrol officers shot him multiple times, but the injuries were not fatal. Tragically, 30-year-old Jed Waits took his own life. When his family was informed of the incident, they were shocked. They had no idea that Jed had been involved in such activities for years. They could not believe that a once kind person had become a stalker and a murderer. Jed's family was profoundly affected by the school shooting. His parents were devastated, regretting that they had not been aware of Jed's problems and had not sought professional help sooner. For days after the tragedy, more than 1,500 mourners attended Jennifer Paulson's funeral at the city's cathedral, including friends, family, and classmates. She was well loved. Many of Jennifer's students were deeply saddened by the loss, as her family viewed her as a beacon of hope for their future. In memory of Jennifer Paulson, a garden was created on the school grounds, which remains to this day. About 50 students, mostly from her class, along with their families, contributed to the creation of the garden, each processing their loss in their own way. Jennifer's family struggled to come to terms with her tragic death. Her father, Ken Paulson, wanted to honor her memory by helping others. He spent years creating legislation to better protect victims of stalking, which he called the Jennifer Paulson Law. His main goal was to speed up the government's response to these cases to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The law also classifies online stalking as in-person stalking. Additionally, Ken advocated for public disclosure of information about individuals with a history of stalking, allowing people to check their acquaintances against available databases. If Jennifer had access to this information, she might have learned about his past troubles. In November 2008, after a court ordered Jed not to contact her, he attacked another girl. Although she narrowly escaped death and was seriously injured, the police did not intervene to stop Jed. As a result, he continued to stalk Jennifer. In the United States, victims of stalking are often required to provide evidence of stalking and harassment. In many cases, authorities simply issue warnings. When the initiative was finally enacted into law, Ken felt satisfied, believing it would save countless victims from the tragic consequences of stalking. Although he knew it would not bring back the life of his beloved daughter, Jennifer, who had died at the age of 30, he believed his efforts had been worthwhile. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Ben Renick. Ben Renick was born on August 4, 1987, in St. Louis, Missouri, USA. He was the second and youngest child in his family. His older brother, Sam, considered Ben a precious gift from the moment he was born. From a young age, Ben developed a fascination with snakes. While attending Montgomery County High School, he immersed himself in learning about them and dreamed of starting a snake breeding business. Although this hobby was uncommon, he found it incredibly interesting. As a child, Ben met Lindley, a girl 4 years his senior. She was beautiful, with long, light hair and delicate features, but Ben was too young to pursue a relationship, so nothing happened between them. After graduating high school, Ben continued to focus on his passion for snakes, expanding his knowledge and gaining respect from other experts in the field. 2 years later, Ben's mother passed away from a serious illness. While this was a painful experience, he decided to move forward, possibly to ease the shock. He focused all his efforts on turning his hobby into a source of income, and eventually, his hard work paid off. By 2010, Ben Renick had become a successful breeder and established a national business called Renick Reptiles, which specialized in the selective breeding of designer pythons. The business quickly thrived, and soon, reptiles were being sold to customers worldwide, from the UK to Japan. Although Sam and Ben had separate homes, they continued to live on the family farm with their father, honoring their mother's wish not to abandon it after her passing. The 28-acre property provided ample space, allowing the brothers to maintain a close relationship. They often spent weekends fishing together and enjoyed a strong brotherhood. As the business grew, the facility became home to over 3,000 reptiles, some valued at $1,000 each. Ben enjoyed success and often traveled to conventions across the United States, earning a reputation as a prominent figure in the reptile community, even being referred to as the rock star of snakes. In interviews, he attributed his success to his careful attention to his pets and his commitment to his clients. In 2011, he felt particularly fortunate when he reconnected with Lindley, a girl he had had a crush on during his youth. Before reconnecting with Ben, Lindley had been in several relationships. She was initially involved with a man named Michael Humphrey, who was later imprisoned for banned substance possession. After another unsuccessful relationship, Lindley became a mother to a son. By the time she reached out to Ben again, she was single, and Ben had matured, making their communication smooth and comfortable. Ben confidently pursued Lindley, and their relationship quickly became serious. Ben quickly became overwhelmed by the success he achieved at a young age. He was a respected professional, admired by many. Ben was not only business-minded but also kind and mature for his age, which allowed him to take on a fatherly role for Lindley's son, whom he embraced as his own. Eventually, Lindley, her son, and Ben began living together. Tragedy struck the family in 2012 when Frank, the father of Ben and Sam, was involved in a stock scheme that caused significant financial losses for many people. Then, Ben discovered that his father had taken his own life. This devastating event forced the brothers to inherit the family property and confront their loss once again, now complicated by the shame surrounding the incident. Ben found comfort in his personal professional project and in a long-awaited moment with Lindley. In 2014, she accepted his marriage proposal, and that year, they celebrated a wedding. Soon after, they welcomed a daughter named Emma. In his free time, Ben enjoyed playing the drums and watching horror films, but his main focus was on his family. He valued the time spent with his wife and children. To keep the romance alive, he organized weekly date nights with Lindley, just as they had done when they were engaged. This was also his way of showing appreciation for Lindley's hard work, as she dedicated herself to helping him manage their snakes, which involved cleaning and sorting. In 2016, they launched a second business, this time in the personal hygiene sector. They opened a spa in a shopping center in Columbia, Missouri, something Lindley had always dreamed of, given her background as an experienced massage therapist. She invited her longtime friend, Ashley Shaw, to join the salon. Their success continued into 2017, when Ben made a $1 million deal selling some of his pythons and anacondas. The agreement included quarterly payments of $200,000, starting with the first payment in February. However, Lindley's business was facing serious financial problems. In early 2017, she had credit debt, and two companies sued her for over $88,000 in unpaid bills for work done in previous years. Additionally, Lindley was hiding more than just her financial troubles. She created a profile on a dating app and began an affair with a man named Brandon Blackwell, meeting him a few times each month. For reasons that could include her financial struggles, ambition, or feelings of betrayal, Lindley started to contemplate how to rid herself of her husband, Ben, although she never openly expressed this desire. Lindley confided in Ashley, who worked at the spa, claiming that she was a victim of violence and abuse from Ben. Taking advantage of this situation, she persuaded her friend to help her escape. Ashley agreed and provided Lindley with banned substance. On one night in 2017, Lindley secretly drugged Ben by spiking his protein shake with a nearly lethal dose of illegal substances. Miraculously, Ben survived the ordeal, although he became very ill and took a long time to recover. Throughout this process, he never suspected that his wife was involved. The bank that Lindley was in debt to informed Ben of the situation. Aware of the crisis at the spa and his wife's deception, Ben spoke up and shared his feelings with her. This led to a tense atmosphere between them that lasted for several weeks. In mid-May 2017, Lindley decided to contact her ex-boyfriend Michael, who had just been released from prison. She and Ashley visited him at his home. During their conversation, which seemed casual as they reminisced about their past relationship, Lindley claimed to be a victim of an abusive husband. She even confessed to Michael about her failed attempt to use a protein drink to escape her situation. Lindley expressed that she felt trapped and was determined to file for divorce, but she was also afraid of how Ben would react, fearing that his response could threaten her life and the lives of her children. While continuing her affair with Brandon, Lindley made the mistake of sharing every detail of her plans to remove Ben from her life. On June 8, 2017, Lindley and her ex-boyfriend Michael went to the farm, equipped with gloves, a gun, and a plan. Lindley intended to introduce Michael as an old friend interested in Ben's business. However, when Michael saw Ben busy cleaning the breeding facilities, he felt uneasy. He asked Lindley to go back to the car, where he handed her the gun and suggested that she take charge of the plan. Without hesitation or fear, Lindley returned to the scene and, seeing that Ben was focused on his work, she attacked him multiple times. Michael picked up most of the shell casings he found, but he missed a few that were left behind. Afterward, he and Lindley went to the spa, where Lindley removed her clothes. Ashley was there, and Lindley asked her to help wash her body and arms thoroughly. During this time, Lindley explained to Ashley what had happened. Later, Lindley returned to the snake nursery and pretended to be surprised and upset. She called Sam to inform him about Ben's situation. Sam rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, thought Ben had been bitten by an anaconda because his skull looked crushed and there were 2 puncture wounds on his arm that resembled bite marks. Sam immediately called emergency services. Montgomery County Coroner Dave Colbert had described the scene as one of the strangest and most dangerous he had encountered in his 20-year career. Investigators searched the nursery, which housed 10-foot pythons and anacondas weighing over 90 kilograms. They were unsure where the anaconda might be hiding. As they carefully examined the area, Colbert made a shocking discovery: Ben's body, lying face down, concealed the actual cause of death. It wasn't an anaconda bite that killed him. He had been attacked with a weapon 8 times at close range. Investigators initially considered the possibility of a botched robbery but dismissed it since none of the snakes were missing. The evidence at the crime scene suggested that Ben was familiar with his killer. The agents decided to closely monitor those who were closest to Ben, ensuring that no potential suspects were overlooked. The day after the murder, detectives questioned Sam and then Lindley. A surprising moment occurred when Lindley tried to blame Sam for the crime, but this theory was never pursued. Sam, who had no gunpowder residue on his hands and fully cooperated with the investigation, was released. While the detectives continued their work, the community of reptile breeders came together to support Ben's wife and children by organizing an online auction for snakes. However, just 11 days after Ben's murder, Lindley, who everyone thought was grieving, made a shocking confession during another interrogation of her. She revealed that at the time of the murder, she had an alibi: she was with Brandon, her affair partner. Detectives investigated the alibis of Lindley and Brandon, confirming they were not involved. Next, they questioned Ashley. At the same time, they examined Lindley and Ben's Facebook accounts, discovered that the spa was facing financial difficulties, which had made Ben very angry. For months after the incident, Lindley returned to the police station and agreed to take a polygraph test. However, the test was unsuccessful when she was asked about her relationship with her ex-boyfriend Michael and the messages they had exchanged in the hours surrounding Ben's death. Lindley stated that Michael had visited the snake farm as a client. Lindley faced a lot of circumstantial evidence that seemed to implicate her, and investigators made this clear to her. However, her gunshot residue test came back negative. Without any witnesses, a murder weapon, or direct evidence tying her to the crime, the officers had no option but to let her go free from the interrogation room. A few weeks later, claiming financial difficulties, Lindley closed the spa and quickly left town. Before leaving, she put the family property up for sale. In February 2018, she applied for 2 types of property payments from the family allowance, totaling $15,000, along with monthly family benefits. That summer, she sold Ben's property to a married couple for over $740,000, unaware that the police were suspicious of her. Sam remained oblivious to her connection to his brother's murder. Months passed with no arrests made. snake enthusiasts confused and reached out to each other for any information about the case. Sam and others in Ben's close circle wanted to support Lindley as much as they could. However, as time passed, they noticed something was wrong when she refused to talk to them, wouldn't let Sam see the children, and prevented him from taking Ben's belongings. A year and a half after Ben's murder, Lindley and Brandon had a child together, but Lindley soon claimed that Brandon had become aggressive, leading her to break up with him. She also secured a restraining order against him and accused him of violence. Brandon denied these claims but ended up in jail because of them. Meanwhile, speculation grew about the murder, with many people suspecting that Lindley might have been involved or even orchestrated it through someone else. This question lingered for nearly 3 years without any answers, leaving authorities with little progress in the investigation. In January 2020, the case took an unexpected, welcome turn. Brandon, who was in jail, decided to make a deal. He contacted the police to share what he knew about Ben's unsolved murder case, claiming he was closely involved. This prompted a renewed investigation. On January 16, 2020, the police arrested Lindley and Michael for murder, shocking their close friends. Sam felt relieved to finally learn the truth. However, investigators needed more evidence. They sought a witness who could provide crucial details. The detectives then arrested Ashley and explained her potential legal consequences. She could either align with Lindley and face severe charges as an accomplice or cooperate with the investigation, which could lead to Lindley being charged with first-degree murder. The authorities promised Ashley leniency if she agreed to cooperate. She ultimately revealed everything, from the harmful ingredients in the lethal cocktail to the details of the murder. Nonetheless, the murder weapon was still missing. By the end of 2021, Sam was preparing for the trials against the alleged murderers of his brother. He was mainly focused on staying composed throughout the process. Lindley's defense team was working hard to prevent Brandon's testimony from being included in the trial. The prosecution argued that Lindley had fired the gun and that Michael Humphrey was also part of the plan. The defense countered by claiming that Lindley had tricked Michael into coming to a snake farm by telling him she needed protection for a divorce discussion with Ben. They stated that Michael was caught off guard when Lindley suddenly pulled out a weapon and attacked Ben. Ultimately, the jury did not see Michael as an innocent witness and found him guilty of first-degree murder after several hours of deliberation. Facing a life sentence, Michael changed his account, claiming he had supplied the gun used by Lindley. He agreed to cooperate with the investigation in hopes of being released on parole. He guided the investigators to the murder weapon, which had been hidden in the attic of Lindley's mother's house. With the weapon recovered, the jury now had to address the lingering question: who actually pulled the trigger? The prosecution painted Lindley as a woman as cold-blooded as one of Ben's snakes, portraying her as a killer who attacked Ben and then continued her day as if nothing had happened. As the trial neared its conclusion, the defense made a bold move by allowing Lindley to recount the troubled and violent marriage she claimed she was escaping. However, she had no evidence to support her story, and there were no police reports documenting any physical abuse. Nearly 5 years had passed since Ben's murder, and a weary Sam awaited the jury's decision regarding Lindley. After 12 hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict: Ben Renick was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Sam's disappointment with the sentence seemed to resonate with the judge, but Missouri state laws prevented any increase in the sentence. Lindley would become eligible for parole in 2035, and the charges against Brandon were dismissed. Ben's close friends still remember him as if he were alive. A new species of snake, called the Renick ghost, was named in his honor. This snake is distinct for having fewer black spots, which gives it a ghostly appearance, a strong symbol of how much he meant to the community. They continue to miss him deeply, and at every event his friends attend, there is always an empty spot that can never be filled. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The Case of Heath Starks. On January 17, 1997, a man in Lonoke, Arkansas, made what he calls one of the greatest mistakes of his life. 20-year-old Heath Starks loved his family. One minute he arrived at his family home, the next minute, he found his entire family dead on the living room floor. To this day, he claims that his mother and sister always supported him. Although he and his father had a tumultuous relationship, he maintains that they did not deserve to die. This is the story of Heath Starks, Jack Walls, and the Boy Scouts of America. Lonoke, Arkansas is a quaint town that many would describe as the ideal American life. Like any small town, the residents were family-oriented, and their bonds were tight. The residents of Lonoke held their values close to their chests, and the town became a standout moral compass to those around it. Three of the most prevalent aspects of Lonoke were its dutiful church scene, appreciation for sports, and love for the Boy Scouts, along with their mantra, respect, honor, and obey. Much like many boys in America, Heath Starks was a longtime member of the Boy Scouts, eventually reaching the coveted Eagle Scout status. His mother, Barbara, and his sister, Heather, shared a tight bond with him throughout his childhood. The only wedge in this seemingly perfect family life appeared to be his father, Joe. Heather was definitely his protector. She apparently felt very threatened by their father because Heath wasn't going to be the perfect child. Heath did typical kid things and made kid mistakes that were unacceptable to Joe. He struggled with learning disabilities and had ADHD, which affected his ability to get work done at school. Heath and his group had a favorite scoutmaster, Charles Jack Walls III, who was kind and doting. The boys under his care quickly formed a strong bond with Walls. Not only was he a respected father, but the Walls name was well known in Lonoke, thanks to his family's wealth and his father's work as a judge. Everyone wanted to be one of Walls's boys. Starks himself said in an interview at the time that when people had problems with their boys, Walls always said he could put them in the Scouts and mold them into upstanding young men that their parents could be proud of. The use of the word mold in Starks' recounting is particularly haunting, considering the context of his case. Walls was not just a guide, he was a leader, a great influence, a savior, as Starks' grandmother put it. Now, that term drips with painful irony. The people of Lonoke, Arkansas, would look at Jack Walls and describe him as magic. He was a perfect citizen who encouraged young children to be the best they could be, a role model for all. To most, he was the ideal American citizen, the perfect person to look after their children. Unfortunately, that trust would be shattered in one of the most gruesome ways. For many parents of Scouts under Walls, he became a confidant for any issues or conflicts. The Scouts would report their worries to Walls, and in turn, their parents would seek advice from him. This allowed Walls to insert himself into the family dynamics of countless people. When their parents were not spending time with their children, Walls sometimes took on the role of teacher, introducing them to military skills as they shot guns and hunted. Other times, the topics veered into discussions about alcohol and adult magazine. Two of his Scouts, Doug Hogan and Mark McConnell, reported Walls' misconduct to their families in the summer of 1992. Cletus Hogan, Doug Hogan's father, had Jack Walls resign from the Boy Scouts of America after reporting the incident. However, when he turned the case over to the courts, Walls used his reputation and power within the Lonoke community to get the charges dismissed, slandering the Hogan as people who wanted a part of Walls' fortune. Doug Hogan, in turn, became a target for the other boys in the Scouts due to their growing protectiveness of Walls and their newfound skills in firearms. Heath Starks was one of the boys groomed by Walls during this time. Behind the scenes, Walls began sowing discord between Starks and Starks' father, further establishing himself as a father figure in Starks' life. Joe Starks, Starks' father, was distant and often physically disciplined him as a child, so Starks turned to his trusted Scout leader with his boyhood problems, further entrenching himself under Walls' control. When Starks' mother, Barbara, discovered that he had been assaulted by Walls, she insisted that Starks file charges against him. However, the charges all but disappeared by the time Starks entered college. He sought Walls' approval for almost everything he did. Walls had firmly grasped control over Starks' life, and the turmoil that Starks experienced would soon come to a head. After Starks took a weekend off from college, one horrifying day, Barbara walked in on Walls and Starks together. She never blamed her son, nor did she attempt to interrogate him. She simply went to her pastor to seek advice on the terrifying situation. Starks inevitably confided in his mother and sister Heather about what had been happening to him. This sent Walls into a frenzy and asked him to solve the problem. After years of insistence that Walls's protection was of the utmost importance, Starks heard the order and obeyed. On the evening of January 17, 1997, Starks went to his family home and ransacked it. His sister walked in just as he had his mouth around the barrel of a .45 caliber handgun. Their mother followed her soon after, and then their father seconds later. They were dead. Heath had taken the gun and shot them all. He had killed the problem as ordered. His entire family was dead, and as the courts would soon find, it was entirely his fault. Even if Walls was there to ensure the deed was done, it was Starks who pulled the trigger. Starks said he went back into the living room, got on his knees, and stuck his gun in his mouth. About that time, his mom came through, and he saw his dad's face. The next thing he knew, they're all dead. Starks fled the scene and disposed of his gun in a nearby river. The other items were put inside a dumpster by a Pizza Hut in town. Starks sought solace at the apartment of a college friend at Henderson State University, where police would find and arrest him at 6 a.m. the next day. Heath Starks was charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Investigator Steve Finch led the Starks family murder investigation and conducted several interviews with Starks to determine the motive for the murders. It was then that Starks reported the manipulation and abuse he suffered at the hands of his scoutmaster to the police. It was speculated that Walls was even present during the murders, and yet, when Starks was arrested and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, Walls was not brought under investigation. No display of evidence, no calling of witnesses, and no defense whatsoever. The guilty plea, made at Walls's command, provided little reason or purpose. However, Walls would not remain innocent forever. Eventually, an investigation was launched against Walls thanks to the bravery of his own nephew, another victim of Walls. Like the other victims, Wade Knox had a strong relationship with his uncle. Knox joined the Boy Scouts because of Walls' influence and wanted Walls as his troop leader. He was also a part of Starks' Boy Scout troop. There were many similarities between the young Starks and Knox, from their upbringing to their personal difficulties, which Walls exploited like a parasite. Karen Knox said of her son, Knox was probably 6 or 7 when he joined the Boy Scouts. He became a Boy Scout because of Walls. Walls was his uncle and encouraged it. It was as normal as it could be. When Knox was 5, she noticed things about him that just weren't right. He had attention deficit issues, he was on medication, and then he was diagnosed with dyslexia. They knew it was going to be hard. By 3rd grade, things fell apart at school. Wade could no longer play sports or get along with anybody. He did not respect authority. It was just constant turmoil. Knox would get so upset that he would run away, and Walls would smooth everything over. They lived right across the street from Walls, and there were always scouts over there. Wade Knox, Walls' nephew, had been abused by his uncle since the age of 7. Reportedly, when Walls was out washing his car, Knox put a gun to Walls' head and forced Walls to confess to Wade's parents that he, his brother, and several other scouts, including Heath, had repeatedly abused by him. Later traumatized by the things Walls had done to him, Wade Knox committed to end his own life. His family started the Wade Knox Children's Advocacy Center in hopes that no other family would have to endure the turmoil they experienced. In hindsight, many people who view the case of the Starks family murder speculate that Starks did not act alone and that the trial was mishandled. Many believe that a guilty plea by Starks would not have been submitted if proper action had been taken by the investigators. These claims, while lacking physical evidence, were supported by the then special prosecutor, Betty Dickey. Due to Walls' influence over the town, the victims' families were not going to file charges and simply allowed Walls to admit himself into a mental health facility. This changed as soon as they learned of the details of what Walls had done to their children. This was when Starks admitted that Walls had ordered him to kill his parents, claiming Walls was present to ensure it was done. Though in later interviews, Starks stated he did not remember if anyone else was in the house on the day he killed his family. Eventually, Walls was charged with 6 counts of abuse assault, no penalties in connection with the Starks family case. He now serves 1 life sentence plus an additional 40 years. Betty Dickey remarked about the incident, "They were looking at 50 to 100 young boys over a period of 20 to 30 years that he'd molested." The reason only 6 counts were charged against Walls was due to the statute of limitations. In 2020, Heath Starks was interviewed by Fox 16 about the murders and the abuse he suffered at the hands of Jack Walls. Surprisingly, he did not blame the Boy Scouts for the abuse, despite their recent bankruptcy and the abuse scandals that had emerged. He did not even blame Walls himself for his parents' deaths. Starks claims he has forgiven Walls, mainly for his own mental health, also asserting that although Walls was not responsible for pulling the trigger, he was the reason Starks' mind had been warped enough to commit such a gruesome act. Starks also places blame on his parents for insisting that he remain in the Boy Scouts despite several warning signs. Currently, Starks remains in prison with a lifetime of incarceration ahead of him. If he had not been subjected to such thorough abuse in his childhood years, his family would still be alive today. Starks had been a victim of gruesome crimes for years, which deteriorated his mental health until he hit rock bottom. 3 of the closest people in his life were dead due to his actions and the abuse of a powerful man. If Jack Walls had not taken the innocence of over 50 young Boy Scouts, much could have been saved and protected. His nephew, Wade Knox, would also be alive. Justice may have been served when Walls received his lifetime sentence, but there are questions that still remain unanswered. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Emily Godest. On the evening of November 9, 2007, Johan and Emily were driving on a small country road in Châtenay, France. It was a typical trip for them until he noticed a large dark object suddenly darting across the road. He reacted, but he wasn't quick enough. The car skidded into a ditch and crashed into a tree. After the collision, Johan tried to help his girlfriend, Emily. The car was damaged and caught fire. She was engulfed in flames and fell to the ground, suffering severe injuries that left almost half of her body burned beyond recognition. Despite her condition, she was still alive, so he immediately called for emergency services and waited for the paramedics and police to arrive. While Emily suffered life-threatening injuries, Johan only had minor injuries. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene. Emily was a history student with dreams of becoming a teacher. She was known for her bright and sociable personality, and she came from a wealthy family with 3 brothers and 1 sister. Her father often indulged her every wish. At midnight, Emily's father was informed about the accident involving her. He rushed to the hospital, where he found her in critical condition and on life support. The fire had severely burned her. The medical staff had to cut away her clothing in pieces, and the doctors could not predict her chances of survival. In conversation with the police, Johan quickly described the incident. He explained that they was on her way to a party in a nearby town that evening. He seeing a dark figure that looked like a wild boar suddenly run into the headlights, causing the accident. After their car crashed into a tree, he lost consciousness briefly and felt disoriented. When he regained awareness, he saw flames rising from the girl's head and spreading to her back. She was focused on escaping from the vehicle and did not notice him. When Johan ran out of the car to assist her, he found that she had already gotten outside. Meanwhile, the fire seemed to grow stronger. He grabbed a nearby bottle of water to try to extinguish the flames, but it was ineffective. Next, he tried using a fire extinguisher from the trunk, but it did not work. Johan took off his jacket and used it to smother the flames on Emily. In the end, he was able to put out the fire by covering her with his body to cut off the oxygen supply. Johan's explanation seemed credible, and the police found evidence at the accident site that looked like clumps of earth disturbed by an animal. It's likely that the headlights startled a wild boar, which attempted to cross the road and caused the accident. Nearby the burned vehicle, officers found a fire extinguisher with a broken nozzle, which accounted for its failure to work, supporting Johann's claims. However, it was still unclear why the fire started inside the vehicle. Although the accident was severe enough to ignite a fire, the fuel tank was unharmed, indicating that fuel couldn't have caused the fire, and the wiring appeared intact, making it unlikely that an electrical spark ignited it. There was a reason for what happened. Johann explained that earlier that day, he and his girlfriend had bought medical alcohol for cleaning and refueling equipment in the garage. He planned to clean the car's interior before selling it. He worked in a printing house where he regularly handled various chemicals. To avoid mistakes, he had developed a habit of checking the contents of chemical containers by opening them and smelling them. He believed that if the bottles had not been sealed properly, the liquids could have spilled during the accident and ignited. Before the crash, Johann noticed something glowing in his girlfriend's hands, which he thought might have been a lighter or a cell phone, but he wasn't sure. He believed that this glow could have ignited the spilled liquids. He considered the tragedy a result of unfortunate circumstances and insisted it was an accident. However, his girlfriend was still in intensive care, and the police felt it was unfair to attribute such serious damage solely to chance. As a result, detectives decided to investigate Johann further to see if he had any criminal history or tendencies toward violence. Suspecting there might have been some malicious intent in his actions, Johann was a 22-year-old worker at a printing house in Gonesse, France. He was known for being polite, conscientious, and always willing to help others. Friends and family regarded him as a model son and a dependable friend. At the time of the tragic events, he had been in a relationship with Emily for about 4 years. They had met when she was 16 and just starting her senior year of high school, while he was 2 years older. From the start, they had ambitious plans for their future, discussing the possibility of starting a family and having children. However, they were in no rush. Their plan was to first complete their education, secure good jobs, find a place to live, and only then consider starting a family. Their loved ones supported these goals, and despite their youth, they had a serious outlook on life. During college, they spent a lot of time together, often staying overnight at each other's homes. A few months before the accident, they got engaged, and Johann gave Emily a ring. They intended to move in together, and everything seemed to indicate that he was the perfect partner. The police decided to wait until dawn to investigate the scene more thoroughly. As the sun rose, the officers began to examine the area and question Johann's account of the accident. Although it was indeed an accident, they found no evidence of braking, suggesting that he may have crashed into the tree without slowing down. They suggested that the car had approached at a low speed and crashed into the tree on the passenger side, which likely explains why the driver did not incur serious injuries. The idea of wild boar tracks was deemed less credible. In daylight, the roadside was full of debris, and it was possible that the car's headlights had created confusion about the objects present. However, it appeared more like a staged incident. Experts who examined the car for flammable substances found that the fire did not start from underneath the vehicle. The lower area of the car near the driver's and passenger's feet did not sustain the damage expected in that situation. Johann claimed that alcohol or white spirit might have spilled, igniting the flames. Emily suffered the most severe burns on her head and back, suggesting that the fire started from above her seat rather than from below. In contrast, her legs were nearly untouched, which contradicted Johann's statements and raised concerns for the police. Forensic analysis of Emily's clothing revealed that it was nearly saturated with alcohol or a similar flammable liquid. This suggested that the fire did not originate from the cabin. Rather, it appeared that Emily had been doused with a flammable substance. This raised questions about how she could have been covered in medical alcohol or white spirit, while her boyfriend remained completely clean. Johann had no injuries at all, which deepened the mystery. It seems possible that an incident occurred that only affected Emily. If she had accidentally spilled a bottle of medical alcohol, Johann would likely have sustained burns or injuries from the fire. Instead, he escaped with only minor scratches from hitting a tree. Emily remained in critical condition, and the police believed that a deliberate crime was the most plausible explanation. Evidence suggested that the incident was staged. Emily had likely been intentionally doused with a medical alcohol and set on fire. The only remaining question was the motive behind it. However, these were merely assumptions that required further investigation. Emily's testimony was crucial, as she was the only witness who could answer all the police's questions. Unfortunately, she was in an induced coma, and the doctors had not provided a clear prognosis. After 5 weeks, she finally woke up, but her condition was weak, and her body was largely incapacitated, requiring a long recovery. Emily had sustained severe injuries that left her unable to move properly. Her left leg was unresponsive, and her arms had limited mobility. However, her cognitive functions were intact, allowing her to communicate fully with the detectives, who were eager to speak with her. During their first conversation, Emily spoke fondly of her boyfriend, describing their relationship as one of pure and sincere love. Johann had always been attentive and well-mannered. However, due to her time in the coma, Emily had significant gaps in her memory. She confirmed most of Johann's account of events, but she could not remember anything after he saw a shadow run onto the road. The doctors believed these memory gaps were a result of the coma and that Emily would need time to gradually recover her memories. Further discussions with the police were unproductive, and they would have to wait for her to regain more information. In the following weeks, while Emily was still hospitalized, Johann visited her several times a day. During each visit, he repeated his story, which started to sound increasingly suspicious. It seemed he was trying to manipulate her memories so she wouldn't recall what really happened. He pressured her to relay his version of events to the authorities, claiming it was essential to secure insurance payouts for the car. However, as Emily spent more time in the hospital, her memory began to improve. She started to notice inconsistencies in her boyfriend's account, especially rejecting the idea that an animal had been on the road. Emily mentioned that she had initially repeated Johann's story because he had convinced her it was true. However, she could not remember any wild boars on the road. Instead, she distinctly recalled the tree they crashed into before the fire started. At this time, her memory was still not fully restored. The detectives decided to interview Johann again to investigate his potential lies about the animals. He continued to stand by his original story, while Emily grew increasingly uneasy with his presence. She lost all trust in him and began to side with the police regarding his possible involvement in the accident. In June 2008, Johann chose to end his engagement with his fiancée, who was still in the hospital and unable to care for herself. In late June 2008, Emily had regained her memory and was able to provide the authorities with a new account of that tragic evening. In her statement, she portrayed Johann, whom she had once loved, as a cruel tyrant and manipulator. Emily revealed that throughout their relationship, she had endured both emotional and physical abuse from him. Johann had attempted to isolate her from her friends and family, controlling every aspect of her life. She felt trapped and was afraid to leave him, fearing he would retaliate. It was a vicious cycle that needed to be broken. Just before that evening, she and Johann were driving together when another argument broke out. The girl tried to express her feelings, which only fueled her boyfriend's anger. In that moment, she revealed that she wanted to end their relationship. Johann, filled with rage, began to speed up the car. The speedometer climbed past 130 kilometers per hour, and Emily became frightened, begging him to slow down. She remembered this moment with terror, realizing she was genuinely worried for her safety. Although Emily eventually calmed Johann down and he reduced his speed, She was left with a lingering fear that if she attempted to break up with him, he might react violently. Emily felt that their once beautiful love story had turned into a nightmare of manipulation. Unsure of what to do for a long time, she eventually met another young man. They had secret meetings, and she began to gather her thoughts to prepare for a calm breakup with Johann. Emily recalled that on the evening of the tragedy, she needed to attend a reunion with her high school friends in Goussainville. Although she wanted to go to the party alone, Johann insisted on accompanying her. As they drove toward the city, Johann missed the first exit from the highway and then the second. Emily realized he wasn't taking her to the friends' meeting. He might have suspected her of meeting someone else. Instead, he was heading to his hometown. Emily didn't want to go with him and began to protest. This was the same road where Johann had scared her by speeding just before these events. Now, he was doing it again. Emily saw the tree he was heading toward at high speed, and he didn't even try to brake. She understood that a collision was unavoidable, and it indeed occurred. Fortunately, both of them survived the car accident. Emily attempted to escape from him but struggled to open the passenger door. When she finally managed to get it open, she was unexpectedly engulfed in flames. Confused and in excruciating pain, she tried to extinguish the fire but collapsed to the ground. Suddenly, she felt pressure on her face. Emily told the detective that she saw Johann trying to strangle her with his leather jacket, which contradicted his claim that he was attempting to put out the fire. This led to the suggestion that Johann was trying to kill his fiancée. Ultimately, Emily lost consciousness and woke up in a hospital bed several weeks later. After recalling these events, she filed a report for attempted murder. Although Emily's family portrayed Johann positively, her concerns about him began to surface. Detectives interviewed Eloise, a co-worker of Emily's at the cash register. Eloise recalled that Johann exhibited erratic behavior. He called Emily daily, sometimes multiple times an hour, and frequently stalked her. He would become very upset if she didn't answer right away. Since Emily was busy at work, she couldn't always talk on the phone, but Johann disregarded this. His jealousy was intense. If Emily missed his calls, he would often show up at the supermarket and cause a scene, suspecting her of infidelity. Eloise confirmed that Emily had expressed her unhappiness about Johann's behavior several months before the car accident, leading her to consider breaking up with him. To gather more evidence, the police checked Johann's mobile phone and found that it had been at the Goussainville station one day before the incident. Emily traveled to this station daily for classes at a nearby school, close to where her new boyfriend lived. They often met during her commutes to and from college. It was revealed that Johann had witnessed another encounter between Emily and her new boyfriend, during which she had kissed him. This incident likely fueled Johann's jealousy and manipulation, which may have contributed to his decision to confront Emily. At this time, investigators found a motive that prompted Johann to take action. The key questions were how the fire started. It seems Johann did not plan to kill himself along with Emily. Instead, he intended to make it look like an accident, with the fire aimed at harming her. When he realized that Emily had not suffered serious injuries from the crash and that her burns were not life-threatening, he opted to strangle her with his leather jacket. Emily lost consciousness, and Johann mistakenly believed he had succeeded, so he called emergency services. However, he did not anticipate that Emily would survive and regain consciousness. Despite this, the investigators still lacked sufficient evidence to file charges, leading the police to conduct a more thorough investigation. During this time, the burned car was at the junkyard, where an expert in flammable materials and fire safety was summoned. After a brief search, they found a plastic bottle with alcohol residue under the driver's seat. The expert indicated that this was evidence of the fuel that Johann used to set Emily on fire. At the time, Emily was desperately trying to escape through the door and did not notice what Johann was doing. He took advantage of her distraction and confusion. After pouring the alcohol on Emily's dress, he casually placed the bottle by his feet near the driver's seat. Authorities found this sequence of events much more believable than Johann's account. They now had the murder weapon, a regular plastic bottle containing a highly flammable substance. On January 7, 2009, Johann was arrested and taken into custody. Despite the detectives' repeated efforts to get him to confess, he stuck to his story. He asserted that he had no mental health issues or addictions, nor did he have tendencies toward end his life or cruelty. Claims that were corroborated by several witnesses who knew him and Emily. Johann acknowledged that he felt jealous but denied the accusations that he had tormented Emily for months. He believed she was trying to take revenge for their breakup. Johann confirmed that he had been at the Goussainville station, but stated that he did not see Emily meeting or kissing other guys. He was there not to stalk her but to give her a ride to school when he could. Johann maintained that if he had seen her kissing someone else, he would have confronted her immediately, making a breakup unavoidable. He remained loyal to Emily until the very end, and was committed to the dream of having a complete family with her. The reason Johann passed the turn several times and ended up on a remote stretch of road away from Goussainville was a common habit. He liked to take detours when going into town. There were also concerns about an alcohol bottle found at his feet. Johann argued that this bottle did not indicate he had used substances for arson. He suggested that it could have rolled around the cabin during the incident and that its placement under the seat was purely coincidental. Despite the plausibility of his words, the detectives were frustrated by these coincidences, especially since they nearly resulted in Emily's death. In the end, Johann was incarcerated. It appeared that the investigation was wrapping up and the focus was now on determining his punishment and persuading the jury of the charges against him. However, in June 2009, a previously overlooked detail came to light that raised doubts about the prosecution's case. Johann's attorney demonstrated that the alcohol in the bottle found under the driver's seat did not match the size of the chemicals Johann had purchased on the day of the accident. From the start, the defense attorney believed the bottle was not a legitimate murder weapon and argued that the gendarmes had made a significant error. They overlooked the fact that the bottle could not have survived the fire that nearly took Emily's life. Since it originally held a flammable substance, it should have burned or melted, yet miraculously, it remained almost intact. The lawyer argued that the bottle only appeared in the car after it was taken to the dump, implying that someone had placed it there. The defense lodged a complaint in court, accusing the police of fabricating evidence against Johann. In response, the prosecution explained the bottle's condition by noting that the area around the feet of the driver and passenger sustained minimal damage. Finally, the judge reviewed the motion, found it valid, and subsequently released the accused from custody. Even after this victory, the lawyer continued his pursuit of justice. He took further steps to establish his client's innocence, firmly believing that the events of November 9, 2007 were purely accidental. To support his case, an independent accident expert was to reconstruct the incident. It was essential to clarify how the fire began and why only Emily was affected. According to the expert, the bottle of technical alcohol was indeed in the rear seat, as Johann had stated, and the victim must have had the container propelled forward due to the impact speed with the dashboard. The bottle likely ricocheted, and if the cap was not securely fastened, the alcohol would have splattered on the driver or passenger. Emily was simply unfortunate. The bottle moved toward her, dousing her in alcohol, and in her confusion, she did not realize what had happened before catching fire. The reconstructed path of the bottle matched exactly with the most severely burned areas on the girl's body, particularly her back and the back of her head, aligning with the expert's findings. Additionally, that part of the road was poorly lit, which meant that in the dark, the driver might have confused any random object on the roadside for an animal due to the headlights. There were several large objects scattered around, making the theory of an accident seem plausible. Moreover, since the passenger was positioned at a different angle, she might not have noticed the fleeting shadow that Johann thought was a wild boar. The only element that didn't fit this scenario was the source of the fire that ignited the alcohol. However, the independent expert had a reasonable explanation for this. He suggested that the spark could have been caused by a combination of factors. For example, static electricity might have built up on one of Emily's belongings, like her mobile phone, and discharged when she opened the vehicle door. By mid-January 2017, 10 years had passed, and the legal disputes were still ongoing. The prosecution's evidence was not strong enough to prove that Johann's actions were intentional. Meanwhile, the explanations involving multiple coincidences also lacked credibility, leaving the case unresolved. A standoff developed between the prosecution and the defense. June 2019, Emily testified in court about how Johann had tried to kill her, and she miraculously survived. Now she could finally share the whole truth. 12 years after the tragedy, the jurors sentenced Johann to 20 years in prison, concluding that Emily was a victim of his deliberate attempt to murder her. Johann continues to claim his innocence, and the disputes persist. What really happened? Was it an accident or an attempted crime? Regardless, all the characters in this tragedy continue to live. Emily underwent several skin grafts and was able to recover from her injuries. She completed her education and found a good job. The scars from the burns she suffered in the car accident will remain with her forever, as will her belief that Johann intended to take her life.